This is Max Loserman. He's what people might call the worst, possessing no positive traits and all the negative ones. Max will need to survive a full year in a particularly nasty version of the zombie apocalypse. Welcome everyone to One Painful Year, Zero to Hero Edition. The One Painful Year scenario was originally created by Twitch streamer Coaster. If you want to see the setup for the game, there's a link to a setup video in the description. I previously completed One Painful Year a few years ago, but this version hasn't been going great. Max's 12th life started in a laundromat. At this point, knowing how hard this would be, I made sure to put on the few clothes available and didn't pass up the cockroach in the trash. Food is food, no matter how gross. Zombies were approaching, so I had to leave quickly. Once on the street, I could tell we were on the main road of Muldraugh. Searching for safety in Muldraugh really only meant one thing, the farm, so I weaved through the zombies heading north. Once out of the bulk of the town, I veered into the forest to try and shake off most of the zombies following me. This was mostly successful, and when I thought I was far enough north, I turned east and headed through the woods to the farm. I ended up a bit further north than I expected, so I decided to loot the northern house, and found a whole bunch of canned goods, but no can opener. Without any real means to carry them, and currently no place to carry them to, I had to leave the cans behind. Heading south to the farm proper, I was disappointed to find a healthy zombie population waiting for me. I had to abandon hopes of getting into the farmhouse, and so I headed back into the woods. I went southeast to the abandoned Muldraugh train station, where I killed a couple of zombies and was able to acquire some warmer clothes from them. There wasn't much else here, so I headed further east and stumbled upon an isolated cabin in the woods. Inside was a handful of still currently useless canned goods, some equally useless fishing equipment, and some water in the sink and toilet. Also a zombie in the bathroom. I wanted to push further, but night was setting in, and Max was in no shape to go out in the blackness of night. Max's claustrophobia kept him from being able to sleep, so instead we just stood in the middle of the room all night. He would greet the next day exhausted. In the morning of day 2, the snow had already arrived and a sickness had set in overnight. Until it wore off, Max would be making loud coughs and sneezes, attracting zombies. After leaving the cabin and finding a road, I eventually came upon a rundown house and a mobile home. Examining the house, I discovered 2 zombies hiding inside. Killing them while being so tired on top of Max's general weakness took a bit of effort. The loot inside included some cigarettes, painkillers, and a bottle of bourbon. In a nearby crate, however, the real prize was found: a crowbar, a ball-peen hammer, and a shotgun. Crossing over to the mobile home, I didn't find any more zombies, but I did find out that this place was clearly meant to be a meth lab. Gas masks, surgical gloves, coveralls, and more guns and ammo were available. With Max's skills where they were currently, I didn't think I'd be able to make much use of the guns and ammo, but we'll see. I also found 2 cooking pots that I put outside to collect rain when it came. This would likely be few and far between, as we were in the beginning of winter and it was mostly snow. Figuring the claustrophobia would be a problem, I moved one of the mattresses from inside the house to the porch. It wouldn't be very warm, but at least with the overhang from the porch, it wouldn't be in the rain and snow. I spent the rest of the day foraging and found a few edible berries and some sticks that would be useful in the future. Sleep turned out to be virtually impossible. Max would snooze for a couple of hours and then wake up almost freezing to death, so I'd have to bring him inside to warm him up and then back out onto the deck to sleep a bit more. On the 3rd day, Max awoke from a bad night of sleeping on the porch. I was beginning to get concerned because our poor fighting skills were going to be made much worse by constantly being sleepy. I spent part of the morning foraging and found a tree branch and some sharp rocks. Back at the cabin, I made a discovery that the room we were in was actually big enough not to trigger Max's claustrophobia. Definitely a surprise. While I was in the process of puzzling this out, a zombie came for a visit. I knew that claustrophobia was dependent on the size of the room, but I expected it to need a larger room than this one. I wasn't going to turn down any slight advantages given to me, however, so I drank a bottle of bourbon and settled in for a booze-induced sleep. In the morning, I used up the last of the water in the sink and headed to the road to attempt to forage for some more rocks. Upon reaching the road, however, I was greeted by a zombie. And as they are prone to do, one zombie turned into a bunch of zombies, and I had a small horde to deal with. This turned out to be a pain with how weak Max was, but after dispatching them, I discovered one of them was wearing a digital watch, finally giving me the time and temperature. In the afternoon, I returned to the meth lab and put on a gas mask to provide a bit more insulation to Max's head. While foraging in the evening, I was surprised to find a ball-peen hammer in the dirt. On day 5, the lack of food was becoming a problem, so I attempted to head north to the small town of Dixie to loot the mobile homes there. This turned out to be a very poor idea, as I was nearly trapped in a mobile home while trying to collect food. In the end, I was able to escape with a couple of food items and was forced to retreat. Fortune did smile on me on the way home a bit, however, when I was jumped by a group of zombies in the woods that included a zombie wearing one of the large green backpacks. It wasn't food, but it was almost as good. During the fight, I also managed to reach the first level of strength, which came faster than I expected. I started day 6 with a little bit of foraging, then ventured back across the forest to the cabin we hid in on the first night. I knew there was some food there, and with our new backpack, I could actually move it. I still couldn't access it without a can opener. I took the fishing equipment as well, although I didn't have any access to bodies of water currently. I also filled the water containers that I had there. Back at the house, I ended the day with some exercise. On day 7, I decided to return to the farm. I had crafted a few spears from the stuff we had foraged up, and hoped that would give me enough killing power to loot the farm, as food was getting desperate. The spears broke faster than I had hoped for, and I had to resort to grouping up the zombies and moving them off into the woods. In the farmhouse, I was able to get my hands on a can opener, which, while not food, opened up access to all the canned food I currently had. While trying to loot the remaining food, the zombies found me and managed to give me a scratch. I managed to lose the zombies and made it up to the smaller house north of the farm that contained a small stash of canned food. On the way back to our house, the helicopter arrived overhead, so rather than lead it back to the house, I diverted over to the isolated cabin to wait it out. Much like my first night of this run, Max spent the night stressed out of his mind from his claustrophobia. Day 8 was all about foraging, and finally eating some of our canned food. On day 9, I finally moved all the loot from the meth lab into our house, getting everything into one place. I also spent much of the day alternating between exercising and resting. I finally hit level 1 fitness in the afternoon. Day 10 was a waste. Max spent most of the day just resting at home. On a foggy day 11, I decided to take an exploratory look at the train yard to our south. I killed a few zombies, but was met with more resistance than I wanted to deal with. So instead, I backed out and went for the warehouse to the side of the train yard, as it's usually fairly empty. I killed a few zombies and found a trowel and a crate. I also found a few tasty cockroaches. I was able to fill up my water bottles, but the zombies started to get too thick for me and I ended up having to abandon and go back home. Day 12 was all about warmth. When I had been at the isolated cabin hiding from the helicopter, I had noticed the antique stove there. It would be difficult for a character as weak as Max to carry, but that stove would allow us to heat food and potentially sleep in the warmth. Max's cold with his constant coughing and sneezing was making life difficult, so the stove would hopefully be worth the trouble of moving. After filling the stove with wood, Max got a warm night's sleep for the first time. In the morning of day 13, I returned to the train yard to do the first of what will likely be many burns in this series. As weak as Max is, it really is the only efficient way to clear the large groups of zombies. So I spent the day walking around the train yard collecting zombies and burning them up. In the end, I didn't get to loot it all, but the groundwork was laid for the future. Day 14 was spent foraging and exercising. Food was starting to get dangerously low again, but not much I could do about it right now. On day 15, I did another burn at the train yard. This time it was complete enough to allow access to the train bunkers? Garages? I'm not sure what these things are called. Inside I found my first sledgehammer, but I would have to leave behind due to the weight. I also found not one, but 2 garden forks. Garden forks function as spears and would give me some solid killing potential until they break. I also found a bunch of padded winter gear that will help Max stay warm through the rest of the winter. The day had gotten too late by the end of the looting session, so Max had to have a sleep on the cold, hard floor. Day 16 was Christmas Eve, and it wasn't off to a great start, waking up on the cold ground. I slowly made my way back to the house, stopping to loot a bit and fill our water bottles. A few zombies had to be dealt with, but by the afternoon, Max was home enjoying a Christmas Eve meal of freshly cooked cockroaches. Christmas Day. It snowed, and food was the name of the game. The garden forks gave me the confidence to head back to the farm, as I knew for a fact there was unlooted food there. I met some resistance from zombie farmers and was surprised to find potatoes and radish seeds on their bodies. Inside the house I found a solid amount of food, although I was interrupted several times by grabby zombies. In the closet, I located a Spiffo mascot head, which I was sad to leave behind. Maybe we'll be back later. Boxing Day, Day 18. I made a soup. I made use of the beans and lentils I found at the farmhouse to make a hearty soup for Max, and even cooked it in the antique oven. It was a good amount of nutrition, but it served to drive home how skinny and malnourished we were. All the food only put me at a weight neutral of 50, not gaining or losing weight. I also decided to plant a single patch of potatoes as I didn't really have water to support any more than that. Winter farming doesn't work great in Zomboid, but maybe it'll help in the long term. On day 19 I went back to the train yard, feeling bold with my garden forks. I cleared out the office building to the north, getting cigs and some more water bottles. I also swung over to one of the train depots and dispatched a few zombies I found inside. I began to check all the radios I was finding for the emergency broadcast signal, and managed to actually find a radio with it. Day 20 I experimented with dismantling some of the furniture in the meth lab, but found it gave hardly any carpentry XP. The slow learner trait was definitely a beast. I spent some time foraging and found some winter berries. They wouldn't solve my food problems, but every little bit helps. Despite having found a radio, I had forgotten to check it, and so I was surprised by a helicopter in the afternoon. I made a run for it, to try and not affect our home zone too much. The helicopter turned out to be a short one with only 2 passes. Upon returning home, I found a few zombies in our space and had to deal with them before bed. Three more zombies arrived first thing in the morning. It was actually kind of them to wait until I woke up to try and eat my brain. Zombies can open doors in this scenario, so they could have just come right in for a snack if they wanted to. I put some light barricading on the windows in the afternoon. Day 22 brought good news and bad news. The good news was that sleeping with the stove on it provided the warmth needed for Max to get over his cold. The bad news was that the mohawk had finally grown out. No longer having a mohawk to protect, I had Max put on a warm beanie I'd been carrying around. I was trying to figure out why we were constantly getting agitated, even though I was smoking like I'm supposed to. It's because we're hemophobic. It's the blood on our clothes that's stressing us out. In the afternoon, I went back to the train yard to do a bit more clearing. I was able to loot another train bunker and find a wood axe. Day 23 is New Year's Eve day, and it's back to the train yard again. While clearing zombies, my final fork breaks. I took it away in hopes of repairing it at a later date, but we'll see. The office building is cleared and a number of cigarettes and water storing items are found. I've given some thought to moving down to this office building in the future to be closer to Muldrum, but I'm not yet decided. Moving with such low carrying capacity could be a bit of a problem. What might help is that in the afternoon I hit level 2 strength. and I worked my way down to the cars in the parking lot to see if any of them have anything useful or are functional. Sadly, none of the cars have keys. It gets too late to go home, so I spend New Year's Eve shivering in a car. Happy New Year! It's 1994, and I loot the remaining train bunkers. I have to fight the occasional zombie, and I spot even more sledgehammers that I can't carry. I eventually make it back to the house, and do a small amount of foraging before the day ends. On day 25, the need for food officially becomes critical, so I have to take the risk of heading back up to Dixie for more food. I make a few spears, and they give me a bit of killing power for while I'm in the area. I'm actually able to kill a good number of the zombies in the area and make it in and out of the various mobile homes to collect the food. It's not as successful as I would like it to be, but it's certainly not a bust. On day 26, I made a realization. I had known my weight loss was a problem, but I discovered that it's worse than I thought. Max's weight is now 48, and I noticed that his very underweight trait has now been changed out for emaciated. I did not know this trait existed, and it turns out that it shows up if your weight drops below 50. It has some stiff negatives associated with it, including a 40% damage reduction and a 30% endurance regeneration hit. After seeing this, I decided to be much more aggressive in eating the food I have in order to raise my weight up as quickly as possible. To this end, I head back to Dixie to loot more. I'm forced to clump up and move a group of zombies away in order to access more houses, but I do find a fair amount of extra food to take home. Day 27 is back to Dixie for a rinse and repeat of the day before. I clump up and move more zombies out into the forest, then swing back around to loot. One of the mobile homes has a large amount of canned goods. I'm getting concerned about this strategy, however, as I'm filling up the woods with zombies that could grab me on one of my trips back and forth. On day 28, I break out the needle and thread and spend some time mending holes in my clothes with leather strips. I won't do a lot, but every little bit helps. I have managed to keep Max's weight rising throughout the last few days, and have reached weight 49. Water is becoming a bit of an issue though, so I load up every water-carrying item I can find and take it down to the train yard to fill them with water. When I return home, I spend the late afternoon foraging and managing to find a few butte berries, a type of seasonal berry that is always safe to eat. Day 25 is all about exercise and food. By the end of the day, I check Max's weight and see that he has hit weight 51, turning the emaciated trait back into very underweight. On day 30, I decided to take a bit more of a final approach to the zombies in Dixie. So I load up my fire starting equipment and head up there. While setting the fire, I make the mistake of allowing myself to get exhausted and ridiculously tired. At exhausted, I can't run at all, and with ridiculously tired, I'm not regenerating any stamina, so I'm stuck doing the entire burn at only a walking pace. I have to admit I was pretty sure this was the end a few times, but this is a good reminder that even at walking speed, you're faster than the zombies. You just have to watch your positioning. It takes basically the entire day, but I make it through. We'll see how much of an effect that has. To add insult to injury, I get jumped by a zombie in the trees on the way home, and only barely managed to make it out alive. On day 31, Max returned to Dixie to see the results of the burn from the previous day. There were a few zombies still in the area that I had occasionally had to deal with. I was able to access a trailer filled with crates of orange soda and pop. I only took a few of them, but it is a source of potential calories in the future. In the parking lot, there was a single truck which sadly didn't have a key, but it did have some good stuff in the truck bed, including a fire axe. Continuing to loot around, I was jumped by a zombie while looting in a nearby shed. After dealing with the zombie, I returned to collect duct tape and a fresh crowbar. I was able to loot the gas station store and found a bunch of junk food, and also the VHS tape for Woodcraft Episode 1. The tape would likely never be useful, but I decided to take it anyways. By the rules of the game, you have to read the generator book to learn how to use generators, but I decided that if Max ever reaches Electrical 5, I'll just teach it to him. I've never made it past level 4, so this seems unlikely. Day 32 was just exercise. I was making real progress on the regularity bar and wanted to try to get Max to more normal levels of fitness and strength. Day 33 also began with exercise, but I had some time in the second half of the day to do some foraging and cut down some more trees. Sawing logs is really the only outlet for carpentry XP at the moment. On day 34, I made another return trip to Dixie and discovered that due to various chunks being unloaded, a few zombies were still on fire. I hadn't planned to do a burn, but I wasn't going to turn down the opportunity. I spent a few hours walking the zombies around. After they were burned out, I looted most of the remaining mobile homes, finding a lot of food. Upon returning to the base in the evening, Max sawed logs. Day 35, it was back to Dixie to finish looting this section of the town, and I finally got inside the boarded up house. In it, I found a spiked baseball bat, amongst other things. Back home, it's more sawing. On the morning of day 36, I checked the radio, as has become my habit, and saw the air activity detected warning. I spent the day exercising and doing more tree chopping to work on my carpentry. As the night approached, I was putting Max to bed when the helicopter arrived. It turns out I had forgotten how the warning worked and thought it meant that the helicopter would come the next day, when in fact it means it'll come that day. I had no choice but to stay put and hope for the best. Post-helicopter, day 37, and things seemed okay upon first waking up. I had a feeling that wouldn't last. I haven't really been showing it much, but Max is routinely jumped by single zombies in the woods when moving place to place, so I knew there were zombies about. To counteract them, I prepared a fire. It turned out to be a good choice because right about the time I was finishing setting the fire, zombies showed up. I spent the rest of the day trying to coax the zombies out of the woods and burning them up. The area would be more dangerous for the next few days as a result. Max was awoken in the morning of day 38 by a zombie visitor at the window who had to be dealt with. I noticed that our stored water was getting low, so I collected a bunch of bottles and headed down to the train yard to fill them. I came across a water dispenser and decided to move it back to the house. Max could only slow walk while carrying it, and on the way home, he unfortunately collected a few forest zombies. Fallout from the helicopter most likely. I had no choice but to keep walking through the forest until I managed to lose them. It was very dark by the time I made it back to the road, so I dropped the water dispenser and booked it back home to sleep. In the fog of day 39, I went back to the road to find the water dispenser. While bringing it back, a zombie found me, and so I had to very slowly kill it due to the debuff from carrying the water dispenser. With it safely now in the house, I exercised for the remainder of the day. Day 40, it was back to Dixie. I really wanted to get into the diner and check the car next to it. In order to pull that off, I had to fight a number of zombies. The effort, sadly, didn't amount to much, as there wasn't much in the diner and the car was non-functional. On my way back home, I was jumped in the woods by a few zombies, including a policeman who had a double holster with him. I doubt it'll get much use anytime soon, but nice to have. Day 41 and the potatoes have finally matured. So I did my best Mark Watney impression and had a potato snack. While sawing more logs late in the day, I finally made it to Carpentry 1. This wouldn't get me much, but it's good to get the skills growing. On day 42, it was time to scout the other side of Dixie. I'd been focusing only on one half of this little town, so I made a quick trip through the other side, but had to back off as the zombie population was just too high. Upon returning home, there were a few zombies hanging around our area that had to be dealt with. I also decided to put in a new round of planting. This time a patch of radishes, cabbages, and carrots joined the potato patch. Day 43 was tailoring practice, exercise, and later in the day cleanup of a few zombies that were still within shambling distance of our house. Day 44 a blizzard hit, and I mostly stayed home. Early in the morning, a zombie wandered by and had to be killed. Afterwards, the day was spent on more tailoring practice. It was slow going. Day 45, I killed a few more nearby zombies. At this point, I think I was finally getting the most of what the helicopter led into the area. Afterwards, it was exercise and tree chopping, which I guess is just a different kind of exercise. Day 46, I returned to Dixie to do a burn on the side still infested with zombies. Keeping the zombies away from the mobile homes turned out to be a bit of a struggle, but I mostly succeeded. And day 47 was a continuation of the burn from day 46. After a sleep at home, I came back and did my best to burn them all up. Hey, +1 strength. Day 48, I went back to Dixie to loot the spoils of my hard work of walking in circles. I had to group up and move a few zombies that had escaped the burn, and was able to loot a few of the mobile homes for food. I found a key to a car in one of the houses, but the car had no gas and no battery power. Day 49 and the helicopter's coming back, so I went off to the train yard for the day. I spent the morning checking the cars in the parking lot for batteries. If I could find a battery, a car back in Dixie would be helpful. I didn't find one. When the helicopter arrived, I took shelter in one of the train bunkers and waited it out. It hung around so long that I had to stay in one of the bathrooms overnight. I returned home on day 50 and focused on exercise, which I also continued into day 51. On day 52, I went back to Dixie to fight my way into the food market. The zombie population was light, and I found more food inside than I was able to carry back. Always a good problem to have. Day 53, I made a stew with a bunch of the food I brought back, and spent the afternoon foraging. Day 54 was more exercise and afternoon foraging. I noticed that Max had managed to put on enough weight to make it to just underweight, instead of very underweight. I was doing my best to keep the weight gain going. On day 55, the radishes were already grown, so I harvested them in the morning, then returned to Dixie to get the rest of the food from the food market, and do a bit of looting. I found some new clothes to change into since our padded pants and jacket were barely holding together at this point and can't be mended. Day 56 was exercise in the morning and tree chopping in the afternoon. On day 57, I passed through Dixie to the road on the north side. I'm still on the hunt for a working car battery, and I expected to find a large number of cars in a traffic jam here, but it seems to be missing. I don't know if the map generation just bugged out or if the large traffic jam here has been removed from the game. Let me know if you know in the comments. Day 58, I continued to focus on exercise. Max's regularity was getting very high, which meant more XP gain per exercise session. Day 59, I went back to Dixie to loot more. Since I had a bit more free carrying capacity these days, I started collecting uncooked rotten food stuff to bring home. Cooking rotten items still provides the cooking experience. On day 60, to get more serious about leveling carpentry, I spent some time turning some of the planks we've been making into spears. It wasn't a ton of XP, but it helps. I also decided to do a dismantling trip through the side of Dixie we started on. No bed, end table, or TV was safe from being destroyed. While clearing a cabinet in a mobile home so I could dismantle it, I found a pair of leather pants. One of the rarest and best pants in the game. So now Max is well protected and looking very chic. Day 61, it was back to chopping trees and sawing them for carpentry experience. I badly wanted to get to level 4 carpentry so I could start making water collection barrels, but between slow learner and illiterate, the pace of advancement was super slow. Day 62 and the helicopter was on its way back. I took Max north to try and go wait it out in the isolated cabin we'd been to several times before. However, the population of zombies up around the cabin had risen dramatically since the last time I was there, probably due to previous helicopters. I had to go further north to escape, ending up on the road. It was here that I found the pileup of cars I was looking for last time. Apparently I just hadn't gone far enough from Dixie to find it. I checked the cars, but they turned out to all be junk. Upon returning home, I found a zombie waiting for me and had to take care of business. On a snowy day 63, I started the day with building a composter for future fertilizer and loaded it up with some of the rotten food I had lying around. Afterwards, I headed back up to Dixie. It was at this point that I remembered using a knife to fight with uses little or no stamina, so I broke out one of the hunting knives to help clear the zombies. I was in Dixie because I wanted to spend some time dismantling, and in order to facilitate that, I needed a temporary base. I collected a cot from one of the mobile homes and took it over to the food market. The mobile homes themselves were too small and triggered Max's claustrophobia, so I had to go with the food market as a base. I did a small amount of barricading just to keep from being surprised by wayward zombies. The next several days in Dixie was spent dismantling everything I could find and fighting the zombies that wanted to stop my wanton destruction of the mobile home park. When, after a few days, I finally made it to carpentry level 3, I decided to return home to check on things. By this point, I was getting tired of having to walk everywhere, so I decided to redouble my efforts in finding a car battery. I began the long walk down to the crossroads south of Muldrow, where I knew there would be some cars. Once I was clear to the south of the train yard, I came across a 2 ambulance crash plus a few zombies. Despite finding the key to one of them, it was non-functional. No battery, no gas. They did have a weirdly high number of trauma bags in them. Continuing on my path to the crossroads, I saw another ambulance in a field. Checking this one, I discovered that it in fact did have gas and a working battery, but aside from that, it was in terrible shape. By this point, it was getting late, so I had to resort to sleeping in the ambulance. In the morning, I attempted to drive the ambulance over to the crossroads. With its terrible quality, I didn't expect it to get far, and I was proved right as one of the tires blew out before even reaching the crossroads. I walked the rest of the way to the crossroads, and after dispatching a few zombies, was able to check the various cars there. None of them were useful, but I did get a bit of gas. On the way back to the train yard, I stopped and removed the battery from the ambulance and as much gas as I could carry. I knew from previous trips to the train yard that one of the trucks in the parking lot I had the key to, so if I could put the battery and the gas in there, I could drive it home. It was too late by the time I made it, so I had to sleep in the truck. The cold and wet from the previous day had given me a cold by morning. This complicated things because I had to deal with zombies preventing me from changing the battery so we could leave. It took some careful work, but I was able to kill or move the zombies causing issues. It was just as I was savoring the thrill of victory that I was reminded how annoying the Sunday driver trait is. We crawled our way back to the house at a whopping 35 miles an hour. A good, warm night's sleep was enough to clear up Max's cold, so I decided to take it easy that day. A little exercise and some tree chopping was all we did. Now that I knew the car pileups were there, I went back up to Dixie to check the more northern of the car pileups and found both a very nice sedan and a very nice RV, but neither of them had keys, so they were sadly almost useless to me. The one use they did have was allowing me to take a full quality charged battery with me back to the truck and swap it out for the highly damaged one. The next day I took the damaged battery back up to Dixie to the car there that I knew I had the key for. A quick battery swap later and it was functional. The day was getting a bit long by then, so I spent the rest of the day dismantling stuff and stayed at our temp base in the food market. Due to vegetation buildup, I couldn't drive south to get the new car back to base, so instead I went north to a small shopping area. I checked the clothing store there and found a couple more pairs of leather pants. I also checked some of the vehicles, but they weren't useful. I didn't want to spend another night away from base, so instead of looting the remaining shops, I headed slowly back to base. I spent the next day tree chopping and exercising. I did have to resort to watering the plants, as we hadn't had any actual rain in a while. I saw on the radio in the morning that the helicopter was coming, so I took the opportunity to go visit an isolated cabin to the south. The helicopter was overhead as I walked through the trees, but gone by the time I made it to the cabin. Inside were a couple of zombies and some useful food. I had to spend the night there. In the morning of the next day, I walked back, which took up a good portion of the day. In the afternoon while exercising, Max hit fitness level 3. The next morning was sawing logs for the meager XP I was getting. I also spent some time foraging during the day. I attempted a bit of mechanics training, but it was very slow. Speaking of slow, I wanted to push for the first level of tailoring, but was out of thread. So I spent the next couple of days back on Dixie, killing zombies for thread. After a couple days, I wanted to mix it up, so I decided to head back towards Muldraw to see how things have changed, plus to get thread for the tailoring practice. I was surprised with the increase in population. I can only assume it's the helicopters pulling zombies out from the city. Back home in the evening, I was actually able to hit tailoring level 1. This allowed me to upgrade our Alice pack, which is a function of the Authentic Z mod. The upgrade added a couple of points to the carrying capacity, and a bunch of extra utility slots you can see all along the bottom. I don't know what they all are. Secondary bag, item slot 1, item slot 2, item slot 3, bottle slot, plushie slot, utility slot, balloon slot. After that, it was various skill work. I decided I wanted to go back to the farmhouse to get the spiffo head that we had seen there ages ago. I guess due to the load we were carrying, Max hit level 4 strength while we were just walking down the road. This would turn out to be the only good news of the day, as the population of zombies had gotten way too high for us to make it into the farmhouse for the head. Instead, I had to make a hasty retreat back home. Sorry, spiffo head. The next morning, I started building wooden walls to work on the next level of carpentry experience. Short of dismantling high-value things like beds, it's probably the most efficient way to level carpentry. Slow learner made sure this was very slow going. As March began, Max took the slow drive back up to the small shopping area to loot it properly. There were a few zombies that needed dealing with, and some useful food. And one nice car without a key. The real big find, however, is a large collection of stuffed animals in the spiffos. They'll make our base feel a bit more homey. I was forced to spend the night in the car as Max's slow driving speed made going home impossible. In the morning, I decided to poke my head slightly up north towards West Point just to see what kind of population we're dealing with. It seemed fairly clear so far, but we were pretty far out. On the way home, I make the tactical mistake of trying to drive on the railroad tracks as a shortcut. Due to the Sunday driver trait and the general crappiness of our gas tank, the car ended up out of fuel before we made it home. I had to walk the rest of the way. In the morning, I put our new friends around the base, making it feel just a little bit more homey. After that, the next few days were pretty much the same. Carpentry, carpentry, carpentry. After a few days of grinding carpentry, I ran out of nails and needed a break anyways, so I headed north to Dixie with my fire starting supplies. My intention was to take the long way around to Muldraw and come in from the north. To this end, I planned on using the temp base in Dixie as a staging area. The following morning, however, it began pouring rain, so I scrapped the Muldraw expedition. Instead, I went home and planted a bunch of crops. I figured it was far enough out from winter that I could keep them all alive. I also used the pouring rain to clean the water in the cooking pots I had outside, and load the clean water into the water dispenser, which was almost empty. I also awkwardly used the water from the pots to give Max a proper cleaning, hopefully helping ease his hemophobia-induced stress for a bit. It was a cold bath, but better than nothing. Many moons ago, Max had been run off from looting the warehouses to the side of the train yard, so my need for nails led me back there. The area had a healthy population of zombies, but nothing we couldn't handle at this point. As strong as Max is getting. I did find nails, but I also found metalworking tools and decided to bring them home with me. In the morning, broke out the new tools and dismantled all of the metal chairs that had been sitting around in the base since we moved in. I also removed the oven for a bit of XP and replaced it with a poorly built crate. Afterwards, I put our new nails to work doing carpentry and harvested some cabbages at the end of the day. The next day was more carpentry. We're getting several walls deep at this point. A bit of foraging for stuff, and as always, exercise. The next day I chopped some trees and did a bit of mechanics training. But the real story of this day is that now that Max's clothes were mostly clean of blood, the blood stains on the ground around the base were causing him to stress out. They would need to be cleaned up. This was an aspect of hemophobia I had not thought of before. I went back to the train yard in search of both bleach and nails. The zombie population here had rebounded slightly. No respawn meant they were coming in from somewhere else. but it was nothing we couldn't handle at this point. I found both nails and the bleach I needed, but upon returning home I realized I still needed a towel or a mop to use the bleach to clean up the blood. So in the morning it was back to Dixie for the hardest I've ever had to fight for a dish towel. Zombies were continuing to wander out of the woods into Dixie, making keeping it clear a full-time job that I wasn't doing. I did eventually find a dish towel, however, so I headed back to the base to clean up the dried blood on the floors, making Max a happy, well, happier boy. The next day I got up bright and early to do some exercise and a bit of carpentry practice. This get-to-itiveness turned out to be a bad idea, because a helicopter was coming, and I just wasted a bunch of stamina. I headed off into the woods to wait out the helicopter, and I thought I had gone far enough, but when I came back home, there were several groups of zombies. I spent the rest of the day struggling to move these groups of zombies far enough away from the base to feel comfortable sleeping there. I took one group east and one group west. The next morning, there were more zombies back in the yard. I walked around yelling, doing my best to collect all the zombies nearby into a tight little ball. When I thought I had most of them, I attempted to move them away from the base, as there were too many to fight. I unfortunately didn't have my firefighting stuff in the yard, as I had packed it away to do the North Muldra burn that didn't ever actually happen. The movement sort of worked, but the rest of the day was spent dealing with the occasional random zombie. After dark, Max was awoken in the middle of the night to zombies banging on something. Worried that it was the windows, I popped a creepy red glow stick we had found and went looking. Turned out the banging was on the practice walls. I killed the zombie and a friend he had, and then went back to bed. The next day was also all about putting down the little zombie outbreak I had caused near the base. I found small groups of zombies throughout the day, at one point hitting level 1 in spears, and later level 1 in long blunt. The combination of slow learner, which gives a general XP debuff, and pacifist, which gives another debuff to weapon skill gain, had really slowed things down. Still some zombies around the next day, but I was starting to feel like I was getting in the upper hand on our little outbreak. In the afternoon, I spent some time foraging and managed to hit level 4 with it. By the technical rules of the One Painful Year challenge, I don't have to move the base until the end of the 4th month, but our current zombie issues has made me want to move a bit earlier. So I loaded up the truck with a bunch of stuff that I don't really need at the moment, and drove up to the small shopping area south of West Point. I think we're gonna make the big clothing store here the new base, sometime in the near future. It will provide a pretty good jumping off point to try and get into West Point, which, while a rough place with pops this high, I think will provide an interesting challenge. Day 100 was a simple day. I loaded another load of stuff into the car for the upcoming move. Afterwards, it was exercise and working on the practice walls some more to level my carpentry. Slow learner really did make it hard to reach level 4 carpentry. The following day, I continued to load up the car with stuff. I would be making a trip to the new base soon. After a bit of exercise, I spent some time foraging along the road. I had thought that the area was fairly clear of zombies, but one came out of the woods to say hello. In the evening, I made a cabbage salad. I was trying to keep my weight stable, but a primarily veggie diet combined with hearty appetite was making it very difficult. On day 102, I drove to the new base to drop stuff off. It was foggy in the morning, which made travel a bit difficult. After dropping off the bags, I decided to travel west from our little crossroads to see if I could find anything interesting. Sadly, all I came across was a few useless car wrecks, and by the afternoon I had to turn back and drive home. The next day was just exercise and loading up the car with more junk to move. On day 104, I drove back over to the new base with a load of stuff. I spent the day clearing a few zombies, and dismantling some clothing racks in the part of the store I wanted to live in. I had brought one of the bare mattresses with me, so I was able to stay and sleep there in the evening. In the morning, it was time to work on turning this clothing store into a home. Using a hand axe I chopped down a number of trees just outside the back door. After sawing the logs, I began by going around the new base and putting a single barricade on each window, for some minor protection against a stray zombie. After that, I used the remaining boards to build a few pretty crappy crates to put my junk in rather than just the garbage bags I moved here in. The following day, I loaded up the crates I had with as much junk as they could hold. I then went over to the spiffos to do some electrical dismantling and to steal one of the large trash cans. I wouldn't be hoarding tin cans in this base. I could delete them. A zombie met me in the parking lot as I was heading over to loot the gas station. In the evening, I attempted to drive back to the old base, but I had to stop part of the way along to sleep in the car because it got too late. Stupid Sunday driver. In the morning, I traveled the rest of the way home. The zombie population on the road was starting to grow fairly substantially, and I did get out to fight a few of them, but I was glad I would be leaving soon as it was getting hard to do the drive. Upon returning home, a group of radishes were ready for harvest, and I found a zombie banging on the back of one of my walls that needed a good smashing. I decided to clear the road the next day. There turned out to be more zombies there than I expected, so the fighting took up most of the morning, but in the end I was able to clean out the majority of the zombies loitering on the road. In the afternoon I harvested a bunch of potatoes that were ready to go. In the morning I worked on my practice walls some more and discovered a zombie in the garden when I was heading back home. After taking care of the zombie, I spent the afternoon exercising. On day 110, I spent the morning foraging and found a leek, among other things. I also spent some time cutting planks into spears. I wouldn't be taking all these planks I had with me, so I figured I'd get a bit of XP out of them before I left. In the afternoon, I loaded up the last of the gear into the car. This was it, official moving day. A zombie came to see me off, but I ended up seeing him off instead. There was a final harvest of carrots to be had as well. Sadly, the strawberry bushes didn't fruit in time for me to harvest them, but time was wasting. I collected the cot and the last of the stuff and hit the road for the new base. After getting settled a bit, there was a few zombies that needed dealing with before bedtime. The next day was spent trying to make my new home a little bit more homey. I built a handful of new crates to hold all my stuff. I attempted to organize them a bit at the beginning, but I gave up because I'm lazy and disorganized slows everything down so much. I also set up my stuffed animals. On day 113, I traveled over to the spiffos to do some more dismantling of the cabinets there. It wasn't much XP, but every little bit helps. At the end of the day, I set out the 2 mouse traps I had and baited them with peanut butter. The following day, I traveled to get an antique stove for the base. I could have gone all the way back to the old base to get the one we had there, but I knew there was one available closer. Out in the woods, not far away, was a bunch of derelict cabins that had antique stoves. I did have to fight a few zombies for them, but it was easily handled. After returning home in the afternoon, I checked out the mouse traps, getting a mouse and a rat. It wasn't much, but every bit of protein helps. In the late afternoon, I took advantage of the fact that it was raining to plant some more crops. I decided I would try and stagger them a bit this time around, so that all of one type of veggie wouldn't harvest at the same time. The next day I took a car north to check out what the road leading to West Point looked like. There was a healthy, but not huge population of zombies on the road. I was using it as a scouting trip, so I just turned around and came home. On the way home, the truck blew one of its tires. Driving on 3 is doable, but not really what you want to do long term. I had to kill a few zombies that followed me home, and then did some exercise as I had let it lapse a bit the last few days. On day 116, I decided to do the first West Point burn, or more precisely, the road leading up to West Point. It didn't work out too well. The zombie numbers were not consistent enough, and my fire zombies burned out before I made it to the bulk of the zombies. So instead I spent some time bashing them down the old-fashioned way. My food was starting to get a bit thin, so the next day I walked back down to the Dixie Trailer Park area to try and find any food I may have missed previously. I found a bit, but the zombie population here had increased since I was last here, so I had to spend a fair amount of time collecting and leading away the local zombies. In the afternoon, the helicopter arrived, so I traveled into the deep woods to wait it out. It seemed to have worked because when I returned to our base in the evening, there were no surprise zombies waiting for me. The next day I started working on our base's protective walls. I was still trying to get to level 4 carpentry in order to build water barrels, but the walls themselves would be helpful in defending the base. In the evening I checked our mousetraps hoping for some tasty rodent meat. I finally changed the tire on the truck the next morning. I took the most healthy looking tire off of a different truck in the parking lot. Afterwards I drove north back towards West Point. When I was about as far north as I could safely get, I got out and started a small campfire. This time the fire worked better and was able to keep finding new zombies to add to the group. It was even successful enough I was able to get into the area of a small shopping center at the southern edge of West Point. It took most of the day to burn out the local zombies, but there was enough time in the evening afterwards to loot the 2 convenience stores to get some food, most of it junk food, to bring home. I was also able to check the 4 cars in the parking lot, but sadly none of them were immediately useful. To celebrate the West Point burn, I made pancakes in the morning. No syrup, sadly. I spent the bulk of the day practicing mechanics, but I did get some exercise in the afternoon. Also, the mouse traps had caught a couple of rodents, so meat was briefly back on the menu. Next day was more mechanics work, but in the afternoon I realized I had never properly looted the gas station store, so I did that. While looting I could hear a banging noise and found a zombie trapped in the gas station bathroom. I left him to his fate for the time being. Since it was raining heavily, I also attempted to wash in my cooking pots. The rain continued into the next day and I used it as an excuse for a crafting day. I ripped up some clothes to get thread for tailoring. I trained mechanics and spent the afternoon planting a few more crops and building some more walls. The next day was more of the same. Mechanics training and wall building was how Max spent his April 11th. On day 124, I finally had a clear day, so it was back in the car and back towards West Point to do another burn. The population on the road had gotten a lot denser since I had been here previously, so I had to start another burn farther out than intended. I did manage to get all the way back to the shopping center though. Another few hundred zombies taken off the board. Next day, another burn, same general area. With zombie populations like I'm playing with in this scenario, it's so hard to deplete the zombie numbers for a heavily infested area, but we're making a bit of progress. This time I was able to push as far north as the preschool, so little by little. A foggy day, 126, and I spent it focused on walls again. Towards the end of the day, I actually ended up running out of nails, which for the time being basically stops my goal of reaching carpentry level 4. I did experiment with making log walls, since I had access to a lot of cloth, but the XP gain from it didn't seem to be really worth it. The next day I was attempting to travel north to do another burn around the west point, but about halfway there the car suddenly died. I had to clear the zombies from around the vicinity of the car before I could check to see what happened. At first I thought the engine or the battery had given out, but when I went to take the remaining gas from the car, it didn't have any despite having a quarter of a tank when we left this morning. The gas tank must have broken. I slowly walked my way home, killing zombies along the way. With the truck out of commission, I needed a new car. In the parking lot, there was a car we had the key to, but it didn't have a working battery. So I decided to walk Max all the way back to the car I left on the train tracks in order to take the battery from there. I had to kill a handful of zombies, but when I was checking the car for stuff, I found a battery in the trunk. I decided to take that instead of removing the one from the car. Rather than walk home, I went back to our old base to spend the evening. I think sleeping in an old base is technically against the rules of the One Painful Year challenge, but I guess I'm just a rebel like that. Calories were still a bit of an issue, so on the way home I stopped at the truck trailer in Dixie that was full of pop and orange soda and grabbed some to bring home. I had to deal with a few zombies. Upon returning home, I was all set to replace the battery in the car when a small problem reared its head. I had grabbed a truck battery, and not a car battery. So all that work and the car was still useless. In the evening, I decided to let that bathroom zombie out of the gas station. Day 131 and a crop of carrots had come in, so a bit of salad was to be had. Afterwards, I went to do some mechanics practice, but it was interrupted by the sound of a helicopter. I hid in the used car office while it circled, and luckily it didn't stay around long. I did a patrol around the edge of the area looking for zombies, but didn't find any. This base location really does seem to be in the middle of nowhere. Next morning it was back to West Point. I wasn't sure I could do it, but I wanted to burn enough to allow me to loot a bit. I was also banking on there being some random fires still burning somewhere, and I got lucky because the preschool was on fire. I had brought a shotgun to shoot off to bring more zombies, but the population I was dealing with there was already out of control, so I ended up using it outside of one shot. Once the fire was out, I was able to loot a general store on the edge of downtown. I found more food than I could carry and a number of electronic home goods I could dismantle for electrical XP. On the way home, I collected more fire zombies to follow me. I wasn't actively trying to burn them out, but I thought it would be useful for starting new fires in the future. The next day was spent dismantling everything in the used car dealership for carpentry XP and a few meager nails. I also did some mechanics practice. Fog the next day meant I couldn't do much, so I mostly just cut down trees and sawed logs. Not much XP, but every little bit of forward progress is good. The lack of nails was causing me a lot of problems, so I decided to focus my next burn on heading towards the factories on the southeastern end of West Point. To that end, the burn I did on this day was focused on the road leading to them. Having to walk there and back because I didn't have a car was making this more frustrating than you would expect. So frustrating, in fact, that I spent the next day traveling back to the railroad track car again to take the battery that I actually needed home. Day 137, I celebrated the working car with another West Point burn. I didn't really have that much of a goal with this one except bringing the zombie numbers down. My water dispenser was getting close to empty, so I had to bring my pots in from outside and clean the water in order to top it up. Later in the day, while training mechanics, I made it to level 1. With this and electrical almost to level 1, I was like 2/3 of the way to being able to hotwire cars. I was continuing to struggle with keeping Mac's weight up. Salads weren't enough to keep a hearty eater stable, it seems. Another day, another burn, this time focusing on the southern road again. I managed to make it all the way to the gas station and the factories this time, but didn't have enough time to burn them out and loot the buildings, so nails will have to wait for another day. On day 140, I did another downtown area burn in West Point. The important bits of it being that I caught sight of what looks like a good quality ambulance in the hotel parking lot. If I could pull off a Siren burn with this car, it would go a long way to clearing West Point. I was also able to check a bunch of cars in the church parking lot, but none of them were useful. I pushed a bit too hard this day and had to travel home in the deep dark. Day 141 was foggy, so I dismantled all the stuff in the gas station and pushed hard on my exercise in the afternoon. It's turning out to be very hard to get to the next level of fitness, just like in real life. Busy day. A burn in the morning that eventually allowed Max access to the factory. Inside the factory, we finally found the boxes of nails that I was looking for. In addition, the helicopter showed up. I stayed inside the factory hoping that it would cause it to leave quickly, but it did not. While looting the crates, I did find a mining helmet light. So when combined with the mining helmet that we have at home, we now have a wearable flashlight. Zombies came into the factory in smallish numbers due to the helicopter, and when I was done, I made a break for it. I had to do another burn in order to get the car clear enough to drive home well after dark. Now that I had nails, day 143 was all about carpentry, building walls to try and hit that level 4 carpentry goal. I had to stay up building walls until after the sun went down, but I managed to pull it off. First priority in the morning was making as many water barrels as my garbage bag supply could manage. Then I went ahead and used the materials I had remaining to start upgrading the existing walls I had. I'm not actually sure if this is a good min-maxy use of time and materials, but basic level walls are so ugly, I wanted to pretty up the place. On day 145, I headed back up to West Point, and in credit to the work the Burns are doing, I was able to get into the shopping area without having to fight very many zombies. I collected as much of the junk food from the convenience store as I could, and did a bit of electronic dismantling. Finally hitting level 1. What happened next was one of the scariest sections of this playthrough so far. I was attempting to loot a bit, but the zombie population got too high, so I used a nearby burning house to start them on fire. While moving through a tree, either a zombie or the tree themselves cut Max on his leg. I couldn't stop to bandage, and the limp was slowing him down considerably. I had to use what little of the stamina we had to keep ahead of the fire zombies, as Max limped his way back to the car. It was harrowing, but we managed to make it out alive. The next day was spent powering on exercise and upgrading walls around the base. On day 147, a quick burn to clean up the road a bit, and then a bit of foraging in the afternoon. Day 148, I returned to West Point to do a bit of looting. I managed to check out a house and return to the general store and get a bit more of the food from upstairs. On day 149, the tropical storm I had been seeing warnings of on the radio finally hit the area, making doing much of anything outside impossible. I brought the pots inside and boiled the water and then put it in the water dispenser. Later in the day, I sent Max outside to bathe in our newly filled water barrels. I spent the rest of the day practicing tailoring. On day 150, the rain continued to fall. I spent the day practicing various skills and planting a few more lines of crops in the rain so I wouldn't have to water them. On day 151, it was back on the slow drive up to West Point. Once in West Point, I made my way to the ambulance I spotted earlier. I wanted to check to see if it was functional so we could potentially do a Siren burn. Unsurprisingly, the area was a bit full of zombies, so I used the office building that was on fire the next block over to start the zombies burning. I spent most of the afternoon burning out the locals. Once the fire was out, I was able to finally check the ambulance. Sadly, it had no gas and no battery, so using it for anything will have to wait until Max learns mechanics level 2 and can start hot wiring cars. I retreated to our safe spot in West Point for the night as it was too late to drive home. In the morning of day 152, I worked my way over to the hardware store in downtown West Point. The burn from the previous day had cleared the area enough that I could get in with minimal zombie interference. The hardware store was sadly not that great. I was able to source a few more boxes of nails and some wood glue, but all in all it was a bit underwhelming. I also took the time to check about half the motel just north of the ambulance for anything interesting. I didn't find much. In the evening, I made the slow drive back to the crossroads base. The next morning, I headed down the road towards Dixie to do some mechanics practice on some of the cars there. I had damaged most of the cars up by our base enough that they weren't super useful anymore. I had to fight a few zombies on the way. I lost track of time while doing the mechanics training and I had to make my way all the way back home in the dark. The next day was another one spent entirely on mechanics. I was pumping it hard to try to get to level 2, as it would open up a lot of avenues in the game. I should point out here that I'm using a mod that automates a lot of the mechanics training. Critically, it doesn't speed up any of it. The jobs still take the normal amount of in-game time. It just lets me use less of my real one human lifetime by automating the clicks. On day 155, I returned to West Point and fought my way into the police station in town. There was not much I needed from there, but looting the police station is always just a thing you have to do in a zombie game. I came away with some ammunition and a handful of dead zombies by the end of the day. That night, Max stayed in West Point. The next morning, I pushed slightly away from downtown to look at the nearby neighborhoods. I discovered a crashed ambulance here and wanted to check it for usefulness. It was also missing gas and battery. The zombie population here was also a bit too high for my current tastes, so I headed back home in the afternoon. Day 157 was all mechanics again. That is until the afternoon when the helicopter showed up. I attempted to hide in the car dealership, but the guy didn't want to leave and hung around until late in the evening. The next morning, the weather was terrible. What was also terrible was my discovery that we weren't as remote as I thought. A number of zombies had wandered into the area following the previous day's helicopter. I spent the day cleaning up the zombies and had to re-barricade one of the windows in the afternoon due to zombie damage. The zombie situation mostly handled, I spent the next several days grinding mechanics for experience. On day 161, I finally hit level 2 mechanics, which combined with my level in electronics allowed me to hotwire cars. I immediately hotwired the one good quality car in the parking lot and took it home. On day 162, I wanted to go get the good quality car and the RV from down around Dixie. I was thwarted in both attempts. The RV because there doesn't seem to be a way to get in through one of the broken windows, so I can't get inside to drive it. The car because I had forgotten that I stole the battery out of it ages ago, and it's hard to drive a car without a battery. The next day I returned to the car with a battery in hand and brought it back to the base. I also started to plan for the Siren burn I wanted to do up in West Point by making 3 campfire materials and sourcing the truck battery I would need to install in the ambulance. The whole process was probably going to take several days in the making, but I had my sights set on making it happen. The following day I returned to West Point and the ambulance. I installed the fresh truck battery and a bit of gas and moved the ambulance so its front was flush with the other car in the parking lot. Next, I placed the 3 campfires around the truck and added the fuel logs I had brought with me. In order to protect the Siren from being destroyed by zombies, you need to block the front of the truck. I like to block the driver's side of the truck just to be sure. I've always been unclear if this is necessary or not to protect the Siren, but I do it anyways. To that end, I needed another vehicle, so I went over to the church parking lot to steal another truck for the driver's side blocker. At that point, I had to retreat to our forward base to sleep, dream of a burning tomorrow. The big burn day did not go according to plan. It started out well enough. I had to fight through a few zombies to make it back to the ambulance, but that wasn't too bad. Once the fires had been set, I jumped into the ambulance and started the Siren. I then retreated to a safe-ish distance. Occasionally a passing zombie would head towards Max, but the vast majority went to the ambulance like I wanted them to. Pretty soon a bunch of zombies were burning around it. I took the opportunity to cheese a level or so of sneaking and light-footed, but I didn't want to go crazy with it. These skills gain XP points by zombies being close to you but not aware of you, making a large Siren burn a great place to cheese the XP. Once it seemed like most of the local zombies had joined the fire, I decided to step away from the ambulance to collect and bring back more zombies. This is where things started to go off the rails. Heading north towards the Gigamart, I started collecting zombies when an alarm at Twiggy's bar went off. I was then surprised to see zombies from the ambulance streaming north through the hotel towards Twiggy's. I had thought the Siren would keep them in place over the alarm. I desperately did not want the Gigamart to burn because of all the food inside. So I collected as many of the fire zombies as I could and moved them back to the ambulance. To my continued surprise, the Siren was silent. Had they managed to break it despite my dual car protection? I would have to wait to answer the question. I had to protect the Gigamart. I spent most of the rest of the day collecting and burning the zombies around the Gigamart and Twiggy's. I had to sacrifice Twiggy's, but I was able to protect both the gun store and the Gigamart from burning down. What confused me more was when I returned to check the ambulance, the siren was still functional. Very strange. My working theory at this point was that only one type of siren type noise could be on at any time. The alarm at Twiggy's turning off the siren on the ambulance. On day 166, since the siren was still functional, I decided to try again. I reset the fires and turned the siren back on. It wasn't a shock to me that the number of zombies showing up was substantially lower this morning. I again attempted to go fetch zombies from the surrounding area. This time I went straight up the main street into downtown to get zombies. When I brought them back, again the siren was off. I had no other choice but to burn the zombies in the normal way. In the afternoon after the zombies had all cooked, I checked again and the siren was still functional. My current theory is that when you leave the local chunk, the ambulance gets unloaded from the memory, and it sets the siren back to the off position when you return to the area. I'm unsure of why it works this way. I have memories of moving away from a siren and coming back to it still being online. Not sure when or why it changed. In the late afternoon, I poked my head into the Gigamart to look around. I don't loot much, as I'm planning to move here eventually. I return to the crossroads in the evening. After several busy days, I take day 167 easy. Just making a bit of stew and doing a few rounds of exercise. Day 168 is a bit more exercise and some carpentry, upgrading more of the ugly level 1 walls to look a little bit nicer. In the morning while doing exercise, I hit level 4 fitness, starting to get into the normal character range, if a bit on the low side. I spend most of the day ripping up various clothing hanging on the racks in the base. I then use the thread and the rags I've accumulated to practice Max's tailoring skill. I had noticed on my way back from West Point last time that the zombie population on the road was getting a bit too high, so I spent day 170 burning out the zombies that were making it hard for me to drive back and forth. Day 171 is a tale as old as time. Travel back to West Point and come across a random burning zombie. So of course, I have no choice but to take that burning zombie and spend the foggy day burning out a big chunk of the West Point's never-ending zombie population. Who hasn't heard that story before? After the zombies are gone, I go to check to see if the gun store burned down or not. I discover that it's even better than not burned down. It's slightly burned down in the most useful way. A sidewall is burned without catching the rest of the building, so I can climb through it and into the store without having to get the sledgehammer involved. I didn't plan it that way, but I'll take it. I also discover a bunch of bourbon bottles in the back of a van in the Twiggy's parking lot. These will make starting fires easier in the future. I spend our first night in the Gigamart. I will definitely be moving here soon. As I'm getting a bit burned out on all the burns, I take my spears and head down towards the storage facility, killing zombies along the way. I'm able to make it inside the walls and loot a bit, but I don't find that much that is useful. Eventually the zombies are showing up faster than I can kill them, so I have to abandon ship and head back to the crossroads. The next day, I spend mostly doing tailoring practice and a bit of exercise. The helicopter arrives in the afternoon, and I attempt to just tank the zombie aggro by hiding in my base. The zombies that have shown up by the next morning are significant but not overwhelming, so I spend most of the day clearing them out of the area a few at a time. I even break out the spiked baseball bat to do something a bit different from my trusty crowbar. I thought I had gotten them all, but there are more zombies around the next day that need dealing with. They take up most of the time of the day to clear them all out, but I do manage to make a bit of time for exercise in the evening. Day 176, I start preparing for our move to West Point. In the parking lot is a box truck with substantial storage, but it needs some sprucing up if it's going to work for moving. I take it down to the good RV near Dixie. It turns out a bunch of Zeds have moved into the area since I've been gone, so I have to group them up and move them out of the area into the trees. Once I make it back to the truck and kill a couple of persistent zombies, I go about taking the tires from the RV to put on the truck. The truck's tires were particularly bad, and blowing one during the trip would suck. The next day is spent loading all the stuff we have into the back of the truck. It takes a long time, but I'm honestly surprised about how much of our stuff I'm able to get into the truck in a single move. I thought I would have to make a bunch of trips, but it turns out it should only have to be a couple. Day 178 is moving day. I grab the last few things and hop into the truck. Upon reaching the Gigamart, I dump all the garbage bags full of stuff on the ground. Filling the shelves will come later. I spend the afternoon working my way around the Gigamart, clearing out a few random zombies. Don't want anyone showing up while I'm trying to sleep to snack on Max's brains. He needs those. In the morning, I drive back to the Crossroads base and spend the rest of the day filling the station wagon with junk. I'm actually surprised to discover that I can fit the antique oven in the car with us, so I won't have to try and source a new one of those at the Gigamart, which is nice. Day 180 is finally moving day. I drive back up to West Point and dump stuff I brought. I then split my time during the rest of the day between killing some local zombies and putting the junk on shelves. The existing shelves are way better than anything Max can build, so I use those. The disorganized trait means Max has to spend the entirety of the following day shifting things around and putting them on shelves. Moving is never fun, but it's a thing you gotta do. Day 182. I didn't realize it when recording, but this is the halfway day for the whole painful year. Max spends it mostly killing zombies. I managed to make it up into a couple of the downtown apartments and attempt to disassemble the beds so I can take them back to the Gigamart. I'm tired of sleeping on a cot. Max isn't good enough at dismantling though, and can't get all 4 pieces of any one given type of bed. He takes out his frustration later in the day by killing zombies that are encroaching a bit too close to the Gigamart. Afterwards, since it's raining, I break out the sledgehammer and make an exit onto the garage roof. I then build a couple of rain collectors up there so we can start getting some water. Day 183 is a construction day. I have to spend a bit of time in the morning killing a few Zeds, but then it's about making the place a bit safer. I build a wall over one of the doorways in the garage so I can put the antique oven there. Next I build another rain collector barrel, and a crate directly below them. It is here that I can install a sink and finally plumb it. This provides us with a convenient source of clean water going forward. For the final construction project of the day, I build a new door to go in place of the one that the zombies broke. The doorknob I used ends up not having a lock, so I'll need to replace this door at some point in the future. In the morning, a zombie is waiting for me in the garage when I come downstairs. After killing it, I have to spend a bit of time cleaning the room with bleach so that the blood doesn't cause Max's hemophobia to act up. I spend the rest of the day dismantling some stuff in the main room of the Gigamart and taking inventory of what's there. By day 185, I had recovered from my burnout and decided to do a burn this day to clear out the area around the nearby American Tire. It was a pretty standard burn. Collect them up, burn them out. Population was a bit higher than I expected, but nothing I couldn't handle at this point. Afterwards, I went in to loot the American Tire. Lots of auto parts available that I didn't currently have a use for, but I did collect a few flashlights that I hope to make use of in the future if I can find some rope. The next day I spent some time in downtown West Point, killing the occasional zombie but mostly working on my electrical XP dismantling a whole bunch of stuff in the kitchen of a restaurant. When I returned home, it was time to close off the garage door. So I got the wood that I needed and built a couple of walls and a door to close off the area. Much better than just parking the car in front of the gaping hole. Day 187 was a pretty basic one. I went out and killed a group of nearby zombies and spent the rest of the day shifting loot around the base. Hey, they can't all be winners. Day 188 was bombastic to say the least. I decided I wanted to do a burn with a little help from Mr. Shotgun. So I went out, tossed the Molotov, and got to work. Things got extra spicy part of the way through when the helicopter showed up. I wish I could say I'd planned it that way, but I've been pretty lazy about checking the radio. I sadly lost the Spiffos to the fire, but that's a pretty low price to pay for all the zombies killed. As the helicopters want to do, the zombie situation was a bit more shaken up going forward. I had to spend a bit of the morning clearing the area around the base, even hitting the next level of Long Blunt. But then I headed back to the scene of the crime to check the cars there. Sadly, nothing useful. I made it into the nearby pharmacy, where I got a smattering of loot. Most notable of the loot was a bunch of vitamins, which I could use to take the edge off of the sleepiness Max always gets in the afternoon. I then had more zombie smashing to do on the way back to the base in the evening. During a period of time killing zombies the next day, I hit the next level of maintenance, and then quickly after the next level of spears. It was a good day for level ups, a bad day for zombie skulls. In the evening, I bring home a rug I stole from one of the downtown apartments, making the place feel a little bit more lived in. Day 191, I decided to do another burn, this one focusing on the northern bit of the city, and while collecting my way through a parking lot, I see what I'm pretty sure is a good quality truck sitting there. I'll have to return to check it out. I also passed by a barricaded house, so hopefully I can make it back there in the future. The morning of day 192 changed the course of the rest of the playthrough. While killing a few zombies near the base, I discovered that one of them was carrying an annotated map. The map contained information on a survivor base in the apartment building in March Ridge. This is one of the most valuable annotated maps you can find. By finding this map, the apartments in March Ridge have been converted into a barricaded base filled with loot. Normally I ignore March Ridge for the huge populations and substandard loot, but this map means I have to go there. So this has now become a long-term target for the playthrough. The rest of the day is spent killing zombies and looting buildings. I managed to get back to the truck and find that it is, in fact, excellent quality, so I take it with me. I also managed to get 3 out of the 4 pieces I need for a good quality bed. I remember seeing the missing piece at a different place we looted, so I take the pieces home. I'll get the other piece later. Later, it turns out is the next morning as I go and fetch the missing bed piece from a house I'd looted earlier. As always, I have zombies to kill when I return to the base. But I'm able to put the bed together upstairs at the Gigamart. It's nice to finally have a fully functional bed and not just a cot. The good quality of the bed instead of just the average quality of the cot should help Max get a full night's sleep quicker, although the sleepyhead trait will most likely counteract that. On day 194, I looted my way through City Hall and the mechanic shop. Neither of the place had much use, but I did have a large number of zombies to kill throughout the day. Since moving to West Point, the amount of time I spend actively killing zombies has definitely gone up compared to our 2 previous remote bases. The next morning I decide I want one of our good quality cars back that I left at the previous base, so I had Max walk all the way back to the crossroads to fetch it. Probably wasn't worth the effort, but I wanted it anyways. Once back at base, I had to kill a few zombies to keep the area clean. I spent day 196 just looting my way through West Point. I found some food, some electronics items to dismantle. I also found some zombies that needed killing. The best thing I found on the day was some rope. This allowed me to finally build what I wanted, which is a flashlight on a pole. I put it in our main room so that I could have a bit of light for a change. I also rebuilt both of the main doors into the base with doorknobs I could lock this time. No longer can zombies just let themselves in. I mean, assuming I remember to lock the doors. I spent day 197 making the base a whole lot safer. I cut down and sawed a number of logs, then used the wood to seal over the 2 unused entrances to the core part of the base. I then used more of the wood to barricade the windows on the Gigamart. I had to change Max's clothes in the morning. We were reaching the end of June and his all-leather outfit was starting to bake him during the day. I switched back to just jeans and a shirt. Hopefully it won't lead to his end. I just have to not get hit. Then protection doesn't matter. I barricade the rest of the base, and in the evening set out all of our stuffed animals. I'm very disappointed in myself that I forgot to do this for so long. Day 199, I spent acquiring another of the big trucks over by the church. It was in pretty poor condition, but it might come in handy if and when I decide to travel back over to March Ridge area to assault the apartments. A tropical storm hit on day 200, so I spent the day finally planting some crops in the area. Not really sure why I waited so long, but it's nice to get things growing again. On a rainy day 201, I decided to take Max over to the West Point Bridge towards Valley Station in Louisville to see what the situation was if I wanted to cross. I was also hoping to add to my collection of functional cars. I didn't manage to find any cars that were useful. I also had to deal with a number of the local zombies. I did my best to make use of the road barricades to make killing them a bit easier. The bridge itself turned out to be so clogged with cars that I wouldn't be able to drive across it, but the train bridge next to it was clear, giving Max access to the other side of the river. Valley Station and Louisville would have to wait though, because I had business to the south. Previously we'd found an annotated map for the military apartments in March Ridge. Since this map should turn it into a loot hotspot, I'm tentatively planning to move there when I'm done with West Point. Before I commit to the move though, I want to make sure that the map has actually done its job. So on day 202, I send Max on an extremely long drive across the map to March Ridge. Max arrives at the outskirts of March Ridge in the mid-afternoon, but the helicopter also arrives at that time. So rather than force things during the helicopter, I retreat back up the road for a tense night of sleeping in the car. I'm mostly just hoping the helicopter doesn't bring any zombies to my car while I'm asleep. Max makes it through the night without being accosted by any wandering zombies. I park the car at the entrance to the town and walk the rest of the way in. Once I manage to collect a good group of zombies, I go ahead and start a burn. The population in March Ridge is very high, so I might as well take the opportunity to lower the count a bit. I slowly take them towards the target military apartments. I don't really care if they burn other things, but letting the apartments go up would be a tragedy. When I finally caught sight of the apartments during the burn, I was pretty sure the map had failed to take, as I expected the building to be boarded up, the way ex-survivor buildings usually are. When I was finally able to make my way inside, the first couple of containers seemed to confirm that the map hadn't worked, as the loot was middling. But when I got to the kitchen, the game let me know, nope, it absolutely worked. Weapons and food. It was getting too late to retreat, so I moved all the way up to the 4th floor and chose an apartment towards the center of the building. That far away from the exit should make it safe from hunting zombies. Max was able to sleep through the night, and I decided in the morning to head out and start another fire in the immediate area. Most of the day was spent collecting and burning out the zombies around the apartments. After the zombies had been completely burned out, I spent some time looking at the various cars in the parking lot, eventually finding a truck that was in good condition. I'll likely take this one home instead of my car up by the entrance to March Ridge. I spent the late afternoon doing a bit of looting and loading it into the back of the new truck. In the morning, I jumped in the truck and headed back to West Point. As usual, the drive was super slow due to our Sunday driver trait. On the way back, I took a detour to check something from the comments. The good quality RV we had found previously, but couldn't get into due to the way the windows worked on it. Someone in the comments suggested that I remove the door to get inside, so I went back to check. Sadly, due to illiterate making it impossible to learn recipes from magazines, Max hasn't learned the skills he needs to remove the door from the RV. It was a good thought, but the RV dreams are squashed. In the evening, Max makes it back to West Point and settles in for a nice night's sleep. On day 206, I decided to go into the neighborhoods of West Point for a bit to do some old-fashioned looting. I broke out one of our nailed bats for a special treat. The looting didn't go so well, because while the previous burns had brought down the population, there were still a lot of zombies in the area. The zombies kept me from being able to access many of the houses and loot very much. On the plus side, a fresh crop of dead zombies. In the evening, I did a bit of foraging. I hadn't done much in a long time, so it seemed like a good idea. Didn't really find anything. Day 207 was July 4th, Independence Day, and I celebrated it in the most American way I knew how in Zomboid. I got in my pickup truck, broke out a gun, and went and raided the gun store. It went okay. The M36 isn't a very strong gun, and Max's aiming skill is still very low. But it got the job done with minimal hassle. Inside the gun store, I was able to loot a lot of bullets of various sizes, focusing mostly, but not exclusively, on shotgun shells and 38 Special. In the evening, a bit of exercise on the rooftop. On day 208, I woke up with zombies inside the base. I'm not entirely sure where they came from. They were definitely a rude awakening. After dispatching them, I discovered that they had broken one of my doors. I had to spend some time replacing it and moving the zombie bodies out of the base. Afterwards, I just checked the immediate area for zombies, killing them where I found them to hopefully prevent the repeat. In the afternoon, Max spent some time chopping wood. The next day, I went into the downtown area looking to grind some skills dismantling things. I went into the restaurant because of the amount of tables and booths to dismantle. I thought I had checked the area for zombies, but while dismantling, I was jumped by a surprise zombie. Luckily, Max got away with just a scratch. From there, I moved into one of the southern neighborhoods and did a bit more dismantling. I also brought a feathered friend home with me in the evening. On day 210, I started work on building some walls around the base. I made decent progress, but stopped in the second half of the day when Max was completely exhausted from the work. I spent a bit of time later in the day patching holes in the clothes that Max has been wearing. It's probably about time to start thinking about finding him some new clothes. The next morning, Max headed north. The day was foggy and probably not the best choice to be driving through heavily infested areas, but I figured, why not? I had to drive across the train bridge to cross to the other side of the river, and then it was a matter of dodging zombies all the way up towards the Louisville blockade. I couldn't drive all the way up to the fence because of the wrecks on the road. Getting out of the car, I had to stand my ground and deal with a number of army zombies coming at me. As I was approaching the gate, the fog lifted, which helped me getting in. I was a little concerned about the gate being locked, but a zombie helpfully opened it for me. Before heading through the gate, I took all the zombies that had been following me up towards the water and pretty much left them there. I had to fight quite a few zombies, but I did manage to find most of what I was there for. The army backpack and various army clothes. By the end of the day, it was too late to drive home, so I had to have a risky sleep in one of the army tents. The next morning, I spent some time killing the local zombies. I really wanted to stay in this area longer in order to loot more, and maybe get some electrical experience from dismantling the truly massive number of radios in the area, but the zombie population was just too high. During the drive home, I stopped at the wreck of a Ranger Jeep in the middle of the road. I got lucky and found what I was hoping for, and that is a snare trap in the trunk. Due to the illiterate trait, Max hasn't been able to learn how to build any of the traps, and as a result, I can't really earn any trapping XP. I knew that the higher level of traps sometimes spawn in Ranger cars, so I was excited to finally find one. When I was crossing the railroad bridge on the way home, a bit of my classic terrible driving almost got poor Max killed. But I managed to shake the zombies and get him home in time for bed. In the morning, I spent some time upgrading one of the backpacks I had brought with me. It gave it a bit more carrying capacity and all the extra slots like we had on the green backpack. Afterwards, I wanted to make use of the new trap I found, so I harvested some mature carrots and headed up towards the gun store to set the trap. I had to fight a bunch of zombies in order to clear enough space to set and bait the trap. In the afternoon, I finished a bit more of the wall I was building around the base. Max woke up to a crop of zombies banging on the newly finished walls. Very rude, I just built those. After handling the wall zombies, I went to check the trap. After dispatching a nearby zombie, I found a pretty sizable rabbit in the trap. That should make a solid meal for Max. I rebaited the trap for later. Afterwards, it was burn time. The burn I did this time focused mainly on the area near the river and a bunch of zombies in the northern neighborhood. Once home, the rabbit was butchered and cooked for a dinner of rabbit salad. Day 215, Max went up to check on the snare trap again and had to fight a bunch of zombies clustered in the area. Unfortunately, there was no rabbit today, so I just had to rebait the trap and hope for tomorrow. The rest of the day was spent doing some tailoring practice and exercising a bit. On day 216, I felt the call to push deeper into West Point, so I started a fire and headed straight down the road into the neighborhoods. I was able to push as far as the high school, and decided that that would be a good place to burn out all the zombies that were following me. After the fire was finished, I checked the cars in the parking lot, finding a good quality van to drive home. Upon reaching home, a number of zombies were banging on the walls, so there was some head smashing before bedtime. Day 217 was spent killing a few zombies, working on the base walls, and at the end of the day, killing a few more zombies. The next day was fairly chill as well, mostly spent collecting rags in order to practice tailoring, and a bit more zombie killing when they wandered into my work area. The following morning, I wandered up into downtown, just looting a bit. In a hair salon, I found a bunch of hair gel and some hair dye. I think a blue mohawk might be in Max's future. While attempting to loot the gas station, I got a bit turned around with zombies coming from both the window and the door, and it led to a very close call in the injury department. Good time to remind folks that zombification is instantaneous in this run, so I don't have to wonder if these injuries have killed us. They just hurt us, thankfully. In the evening, I finally upgraded our bag all the way to level 3, which I believe is the top level. Due to the injuries from the day before, I decided to take it easy on day 220. I checked the trap for more rabbit and spent a bit of time working on the walls. Day 221, Max awakes with renewed purpose. I had planned on staying here in West Point for a couple more weeks, But I can hear the siren's call of all that loot down in March Ridge, so moving day is nigh. To that end, I need the big truck from back at the Crossroads base. The first task of the day, though, was to give Max his beard a trim, and then use the hair gel and blue dye to give him a bright blue mohawk. The majority of the rest of the day was spent just driving to the base in the car and driving back. A couple of zombies waited for us upon our return. The next day is spent loading the truck. Between the trailer and the one cab seat, we have a fairly massive amount of storage. Of course, disorganized slows the moving of everything, but by the end of the day, I had the truck fully loaded. Day 223 is moving day. As we travel, the weather gets progressively rainier and rainier. I stopped well short of March Ridge to sleep in what I think will be a safe place. The next day, I drove the rest of the way to March Ridge. In fact, I drove past March Ridge. I figured getting the area ready to actually move in would require at least one more burn, so in preparation, I headed overland to the closest house to March Ridge. I had to clear a number of zombies out of the area, but the house would serve as a safe place to stay for the night and regroup for the March Ridge assault. I'd actually decided to stay in the house a bit longer, but in the morning I decided no time like the present and returned to the truck. I then drove the truck as far into March Ridge as I felt safe, then jumped out with my Molotov and started to burn. I did end up losing one of the houses to fire, but honestly, I couldn't manage to care. Once the fire was finished, I hopped back in the truck and drove the rest of the way to the apartments. I had to kill a couple of local zombies, but then I made my way up to the 4th floor apartment we had sheltered in previously to sleep. The next day involved another burn. With populations as high as they are in this playthrough, it would likely require me to do a number of these burns before the area would actually start to feel safe. When I finished in the late afternoon, I spent a bit of time looting some of the apartments for food and weapons. Just as a warning, the looting of this building will be haphazard and sporadic, so mentally prepare yourself for that. On day 227, I decided to go out and kill some zombies the old-fashioned way, with a garden fork. My first target was the movie theater across the street from the apartments. I was surprised by the number of zombies still lurking in the hallways of the movie theater, even after a couple of days of concerted burning. Retreating from that, I discovered one good quality car in the parking lot and moved it over closer to the door. In the afternoon I moved, but did not kill a large group of zombies away from the apartments to the other side of the school. While killing a zombie, I got myself a purple balloon that I wore on my backpack for the rest of the day. For unknown reasons, a sizable group of zombies had reappeared outside the apartments the next morning, which forced my hand into running another burn. I took the burning zombies into one of the nearby neighborhoods so as to maximize the killing. This burn included one of the largest groups of zombies I have so far worked with in this run. I know it was very large, as some of the zombies were turning into black shadows, something that only happens when the game can't render all the zombies on screen anymore. I couldn't be sure, but I feel confident that this put a big dent in the remaining zombies in the eastern part of March Ridge. Day 229, I left the apartments, intending to just do a bit of looting and zombie smashing. While working my way through a local bar, I stumbled into a larger group of zombies than I thought I could really handle with my old crowbar. So it was burn time again. The burns are becoming pretty old hat at this point. Group them up, circle until they're all gone. I lost a portion of day 230's footage, so sadly some of the construction I did that day you can't see, but I spent the day dismantling a bunch of furniture inside the apartments. I took the sledgehammer and opened up one of the walls and built a platform outside of the apartment. From there I added water collecting barrels. It was actively raining that day and allowed me to get Max a good cleaning. I spent day 231 moving about the apartment looking for zombies that I could hear banging on doors throughout the base. I also did a bit of looting while I was wandering around, but it was mostly focused on the zombie killing. After tracking down all the zombies, I decided to plumb a sink on the 3rd floor below the water collector barrels I had on my 4th floor platform. It was inconvenient to have it 1 floor below my main living space, but without being able to make stairs, it was the best I could do. In the afternoon, the helicopter arrived and I just hid inside the base until it left. In the fog the following morning, I had to deal with the fallout of the previous night's helicopter. This of course meant a burn. I took it as a good sign that the number of zombies arriving after the helicopter event was staying at a more manageable level than it had previously. Maybe we're finally starting to get a leg up on the zombie hordes. Once the fire was out, I patrolled the base to clear out any random zombies that had managed to get into the 1st floor. After that, I decided to make accessing the water faucet a bit easier. I took the sledgehammer and broke the floor above where the faucet was on the 3rd floor. I then set up a sheet rope running from one floor to the other. Max can now go up and down to fill his water bottle without having to backtrack all the way to the stairs. On the morning of day 233, I finally brought up all the remaining bags from the truck. Didn't want to rush into this thing. I also took a minute to place all of our stuffed animals, always a sign of truly moving in. I was going to be in need of more storage, so I headed down to the storerooms on each level of the building and attempted to take a few crates that were there. I had about a 50-50 shot of successfully picking them up, so in the end, I ended up with 3 crates in our apartment. I finished the day by adding a door to the hole in the wall, expanding the platform a little bit. Day 234 was a bit of a cleanup day. New zombies had wandered into the area and gotten into the 1st floor. I should maybe consider barricading up the 1st floor, but it seems like a lot of work. I then spent some time dismantling a bunch of the apartment furniture for more construction materials, doing a bit more of haphazard looting around the building. On an extremely foggy day 235, I decided to go back to the movie theater I had previously been run out of to do a bit more looting. There were a few zombies to deal with, but not nearly as many as the last time I was here. Upstairs, I dismantled the projectors for a bit of electrical XP. I also discovered some metal shelves. These are useful because they hold a fair amount and have a 0% chance of breaking when moving. I decided to take one of the shelves back to our apartment for extra storage. In addition to the shelves, I also brought home a few movie posters I had to start personalizing the base a little bit. The rest of the day was spent just killing some of the local zombie population. Burns can be fun, but always nice to get your hands dirty. On a rainy day 236, I went around the building dismantling more furniture so I could expand my outdoor platform a little bit. I also decided to do something kind of silly by making a very long sheet rope that went from the 4th floor story apartment all the way down to the grounds. I don't think I'll use it much, because the idea of Max being able to scale a 4-story rope in full gear is kind of ridiculous. It was fun to put up. The next day I spent most of it looting the nearby townhomes. It required killing a fair number of zombies, and at times I thought the group was going to get out of hand and run me off, but we made it through. Later in the day I worked my way inside of a local restaurant and found a rug I wanted to take home. I also dismantled a bunch of electrical stuff in the kitchen, getting pretty close to level 2. Back home it was a bath in the rain barrels and putting down the rug in the bedroom. The next day I spent it looting the building. The disorganized trait slows things down enough that it takes surprisingly long time to loot out a building this size. Still a lot to loot. At this point, I'm pretty sure I haven't touched the 2nd floor at all. While looting, I dismantled all the flashlights I came across, and in the late afternoon maxed at level 2 electrical. At this point, I feel pretty confident in saying that we're not going to make it to electrical level 5, which is where I was going to manually teach him how to use a generator. Oh well. After a rather calm day, I decided to ramp it up on day 239. I took Max over to the community center to the south of the base. The zombie population there was notable, but not huge. I stole some child's drawings from the walls of the classroom to help liven up our base, and discovered that the treadmills in the exercise room are actually called human hamster wheels in the game files. Solid joke, Indie Stone. Back home, I put up the art in the hallway. The next day was just looting and scooting. I worked my way through a few houses, found another nice rug to take home. Later in the day, I worked my way through a video store and got a few more movie posters for the walls of our base. It had been a bit since the last burn, and I wanted to work on our gun skills. So I loaded up the shotgun and the Molotov and headed out in the morning. I went east with the burn. If I was going to try and completely clear March Ridge, I'll need to do it in zones, so I decided to start in the east towards the entry road. I walked around the streets blasting the shotgun and burning the zombies. In the middle of the burn, I hit level 1 reloading. At the end of the day, I broke out the M36 to finish off the last zombies and almost got to level 2 aiming. On the morning of day 242, our moving mohawk finally grew out. I thought at some point the hair dye would fade, but it seems that it will just stay the color unless I change it again. As a result, I wanted to put a helmet back on, but couldn't figure out where our army helmet had disappeared to. It turns out I left a bag in the seat of the truck, so I went back and fetched it. Fully helmeted up, I went back into the townhomes to loot a bit more. While checking a big truck in the back parking lot, I discovered that it was actually in good shape, so I hotwired it and drove it home. While I'm not planning on moving again, I had a use in mind for the truck in the future. I spent the rest of the day just looting and smashing zombies. In the afternoon, Max hit level 3 long blunt. I spent the morning the next day planting some veggies in the rain. It was more food than I would likely be able to eat before it rotted, but it felt like the thing to do. Afterwards, I smashed a small group of zombies that had wandered into the area and spent the rest of the day looting the building a bit more. I started day 244 with exercise and decided to work on the living room a bit, taking a chair and a couch from the common room to jazz up the joint. I then spent time dismantling more of the furniture around the base and getting the materials I needed for a few more water collecting barrels. Keeping Max clean and thus not stressed out was eating into our water supply quickly. After smashing a bunch of zombies first thing in the morning on day 245, I then looted a medical center. I got a decent amount of various medical related items that will be helpful and was able to steal the doctor diplomas from the walls, officially making Max Dr. Maxwell Loserman. Pretty sure how that works anyways. In the morning, I worked my way over towards the school next door. There was a large group of zombies at the western edge of the base. It was a bit of a problem, but I managed to deal with it. Inside the school, I found a few flags to take home. I also got quite the scare when rounding a corner into one of the classrooms. A zombie I hadn't noticed managed to knock Max's helmet off and scratch his head. No significant damage done, but it scared the crap out of me at the time. On day 247, I pushed into the heart of March Ridge's shopping area. I took a loot around the grocery store. It didn't actually take much, as we still have a huge amount of food available at the base, and I can always come back here for stuff if I need it. I checked a bakery, stealing a bunch of pie pictures off the walls, and the driving school gave us a US map, another flag, and a wall clock. In the parking lot of the grocery store, I found another good quality box truck and brought that back to the base. We're getting quite the fleet of vehicles. Back home, I broke out the pistol to clear a few zombies, hoping to get to level 2 aiming. Sadly, I ran out of zombies before getting that level. While putting up the pie pictures back at the base, the helicopter arrived. I mostly just ignored it. As usual, the next day was spent dealing with the aftermath of the helicopter swooping through the area. The populations were now low enough that I could use traditional arms and not burning to take out the zombies, but it did take most of the day clearing to make the area safe. While looting the various floors of the base, we had accumulated a rather staggering number of machetes, so I decided to waste resources a bit by combining one with a spear to make a machete spear, or essentially a glaive. At our level of maintenance, this was unadvisable, as the spear breaks too fast, but it was fun to kill zombies for a bit with this crazy weapon. I decided to do a bit more veggie planting as it was raining, so I didn't have to water the crops. As we hit day 250, I thought folks might want to see where Max's stats sit at this point in the one painful year. He is progressing, but slowly. Because of all the negative traits affecting his XP gain, I could probably be hitting exercise harder, as I'm forgetting to do it most days at this point. Kills-wise, Max is up to 18,249 zombie kills, the vast majority being from fire. I decided it was a good time to give Max a bit of a haircut and managed to actually give him a bit of the Amos Burton and Expanse circa Season 5 energy. I don't hate it. In the afternoon, I decided to open up the apartment a bit by destroying walls to one of the other bedrooms. Left an ugly line on the ground, which I guess means I'll have to get new flooring for the apartment, but I think it'll make the room a lot more useful than it was previously. On day 251, I decided to go and fetch a fire truck I had seen during a previous burn. Unsurprisingly, the truck wasn't in usable shape, so I had to steal a quality battery and some gas from some of the other cars in the parking lot. The local zombie population did not like me trying to steal their fancy red truck and kept interrupting my work. Eventually though, I was able to drive it back to base. I'm not sure when I'll find the use for it, but it's still nice to have. Once back at base, I wanted to deal with the black line on the ground that had been left when I broke down the walls. I even went to the workshop to look for a mod I knew existed that would let me clean it off the floor, and was surprised to discover that past me had already thought of this and included it in the game already. So I used a mop and some bleach to clean the lines off the floor. I then went about cleaning the grime off of as many walls as I could until the bleach ran out. With some time left in the day, I started with what I eventually came to think of as Project Locust, moving through the various apartments, dismantling everything I could for the precious carpentry XP. I needed to get to the next level of carpentry for my future plans that I have. Day 252 was another day of Locust work. Max spent most of the day tearing through the various bits of furniture in the apartment for XP. He did take a bit of a detour at one point down to the first floor to deal with a couple of zombies that had wandered into the building. The knocking noises they were making were getting annoying while he was trying to Locust. The next day, more controlled destruction. I'm open to the possibility that this is a very inefficient way to level carpentry, but I wanted to loot the rest of the building anyway, so it serves a double duty. In the evening, while tearing my way through the 3rd floor, I was startled by a zombie that had managed to make its way up 3 flights of stairs. The shock of that zombie on the 3rd floor led me, the next day, to do a bit of a patrol to look for more zombies in the proximity of the base. After clearing most of them out, I backtracked through a few of the other buildings I had already looted. I was in the market for some more bleach in order to clean off the rest of the apartment's walls. On my way back to the base, I also collected some more shelving, so I would have a place to put all the loot we were accumulating. I was still a little burned out, no pun intended, from all the burns we ran recently, and I needed a break from the locusting, so I decided to load up the shotgun and head out for a little alternative clearing method. The shotgun method of clearing is always a bit more fraught than doing a burn, but it does have the added benefit of not accidentally burning down the neighborhood. During the shotgun rampage, I managed to get 2 levels of aiming. We're now to the point in leveling aiming that the XP gain slows way down. I doubt Max will get another level of it in the time remaining. Later in the day after the shooting had finished, I checked on the farm and discovered a bunch of veggies that needed harvesting. On the morning of day 256, I noticed that Max had somehow lost his keyring. I must have dropped it at some point while I was looting. I spent a few in-game hours running from room to room that I had previously dismantled looking for it. It then dawned on me that I was recording all of this, and I could just go back and check the footage and see where I had left it. It turned out that I had left it on a shelf in the apartment. After retrieving the keychain, I grabbed one of the trucks and headed over to the previously cleared community center. I had to clear some new zombies that had wandered into the area, but my real goal of being here was collecting more of the various plants and interesting flooring from around the center to take home and personalize the base a bit more. I spent the next couple of days just locusting through the base. The amount of XP was low, but it was nice and steady, and it allowed me to make sure I wasn't missing any important piece of loot. At the end of day 258, I checked on the farm to see if there was anything that needed harvesting. Nothing so far. On day 259, I decided to continue on my goal of clearing out March Ridge. I had a decent part of the east side of March Ridge thinned out, but certainly hadn't cleared it. So I traveled over to the far corner, intent on doing another shotgun rampage, but discovered the church was still on fire from a burn I had done a long time ago. So I combined the two, using the shotgun to help pull the zombies in, and then burning them out. Once the burning and shooting was done, I did a bit of light looting and returned home with 2 flamingos to add to my flock. The next day was more shotgun shenanigans. While wandering around, I had noticed the zombies to the west of the building had started to build up again, so I went to the school parking lot to gather up a group and deal with them. It took most of the day, and it even had a second group decide to show up a while after I thought it was done for the day. But the population on the side of the building was now much thinner. Day 261 was back on the locusting, and I demolished a few more apartments for that sweet, sweet XP. I spent day 262 over at the corpse pile in the school parking lot. I was looking for electronic things to dismantle, and when I was satisfied that I'd found most of them, I spent some time ripping up clothes for cloth. I haven't set aside time for it yet, but at some point I want to grind tailoring a bit more. I spent so much of the day there that by the afternoon Max was suffering from corpse sickness from being around all the dead bodies. 263 was more constructive destruction. Day 264 and time for a road trip. I had previously mentioned that I had plans for the big truck we found, and today we put them into action. I started driving with my sights set on the military store in a town northwest of Rosewood. With the Sunday driver trade, however, it would take all day. Passing through Rosewood was a little bit hairy in places, but all in all the trip wasn't too bad, just very slow. I stopped short of the town I was heading for to sleep in a farmhouse. I had to kill a number of zombies before the area was safe enough. In the fog the next morning, I hopped back in the truck and drove up to the town and the military surplus store. I'd hoped to not have to resort to it, but the population was too high for me to effectively deal with, so I broke out the Molotov and started to burn. After dealing with the locals, I spent some time inventorying the store and seeing what there was to take with us. I had to break out the sledgehammer to get access to the back room where the guns and ammo was kept. In the evening, I moved a cot into the closet and slept in there. I spent the first half of day 266 collecting all the stuff I had wanted from the store and loading it into the truck. My original plan for this trip involved traveling all the way up to Riverside before heading home, but I'd forgotten how mind-numbing it is to drive long distances with Sunday Driver. So I cut off the road trip early and headed for home. I only made it as far as just outside of Rosewood where I stopped for the night, finding a few zombies before bedding down in a small house. I traveled a different way back home the next morning, going past Rosewood towards the Muldrow Crossroads. When almost at the crossroads, I took a detour up to the group of warehouses north of the road. I was hoping to do some decent looting, but the locals didn't appreciate my presence, and I didn't have a Molotov. I grouped them up as best I could and moved them away from where I wanted to loot. I still had a few to fight in the end, but most of the group was out of the way. I only really got to loot one warehouse, didn't find too much of value besides a new garden fork. With the zombies closing in on me, I hopped back in the truck and drove the rest of the way home. Upon getting home, there was a number of veggies that needed harvesting. Then it was a nice bath in the rain barrels, a salad, and bedtime. Day 268 was a bit of a change in strategy. I knew I wanted to reach another level of carpentry and another level of electrical. I also wanted to clear the eastern side of March Ridge. I had a feeling that my locusting strategy wasn't a very good way to achieve the levels I wanted, so I went online and found a chart of how much XP you get per item dismantled. Now the amount I get is less than this due to my slow learner trait, but it did show me that beds and big dressers are by far the best XP per item. So instead of spending time dismantling my way through our apartment building, I headed out to the townhouses closest to the base. I then went house to house dismantling the beds, big dressers, lamps, TVs, and any random electrical items I found in the drawers. I also occasionally had to fight a zombie or two that was still lurking in the houses. The next day was a continuation of the day before, working my way down the most northern street in March Ridge. In the evening, I spent some time finally putting up all the various pictures I had snagged for my road trip. Day 270 was more house clearing, this time focused on the remaining townhouses that I had started on day 268. The zombie population was thankfully light, but still present enough to give me the occasional jump scare when entering a room. Back at base in the evening, I worked to get through all the veggies I had harvested. I was doubtful I could make it before they rotted. The next morning on day 271, I took a little break from the controlled clearing to do a bit more chaotic clearing. I went to the near west side of March Ridge with my shotgun and started blasting. As per usual, it took most of the day to eventually clear out all the zombies that came to investigate the sound of the shotgun. While I had stopped the locusting, I still wanted to finish looting the building. So I spent day 272 going through more of the remaining apartments, checking their loot, and just dismantling the high value furniture, like beds and the big wardrobes. The next morning I was back out on the mean streets of March Ridge, clearing houses and dismantling furniture. I was able to make through another street. I started to mark the map showing where I had been. I was using the circle instead of the X because the houses weren't really looted properly. They had just been processed to furniture I wanted to dismantle. Day 274 was more house cleaning. It seemed like on this stretch, every house had at least one zombie hanging around in it. Next day, more clearing. More zombies and more stuff to take home. This day I got a lawn gnome to take home. The hallway leading up to the apartment was getting to have a very nice feel to it. More clearing on day 276. Zombies were a little thicker this close to the edge of town. On day 277, I realized I had never really properly looted the zombies from my last shotgun rampage, so I headed over to the western side of town to look through the bodies for watches and other electronic devices to dismantle. I did dismantle a couple things in the houses close to the rampage area since I was already there. Day 278, more clearing. I was able to get through almost all of the remaining houses over here. The townhomes in the lower eastern corner still remained, however. On my way back to the house, a small group of zombies had appeared in the area I thought was clear. I showed them the way out before heading home for bed. I began working on the townhouses on day 279. There were a lot of zombies still trapped in these buildings. I thought I had gotten most of them, but when approaching the next in line of the townhouses, the zombies came pouring out in large numbers. It took poor old Max quite a while to work his way through all of them. In one of the parking lots, I found another car in good condition. I don't need it right now, but it's nice to know it's there. When heading back to the townhouses on day 280, I came across a few zombies near the church. I broke out the pistol in order to clear them out, thinking that the area had been mostly well cleared already. It turned out I was wrong, and a bunch more zombies showed up. I used up all the ammo I had on hand and had to switch to using my garden fork. It took me a long time to work my way through the whole group. But I did still have time in the afternoon to process a few more houses. Rather than go all the way back, I bedded down in one of the townhouses for the night. I worked my way through another line of townhouses on day 281. The east side of March Ridge was almost finished, and my carpentry and electrical XP bars were very slowly filling up. On my way back to the townhouses in the morning, I stumbled across another small group of zombies and started blasting them with the pistol. Thankfully, this time the number of adds was manageable. After clearing them out, it was back to dismantling. Day 283, I finished working my way through the east side of March Ridge. It was mostly straightforward dismantling of the final row of townhouses, but there were a few houses I had missed. One of these actually turned out to be a barricaded house. And I actually found my first katana of the run in this house. I doubt it'll get much use, but cool to see. Now that half of March Ridge was cleared, I turned my attention to finish clearing out the building our apartment was in. Because I was only dismantling a few things in each apartment, I was able to finish off the second floor. That left only the first floor remaining to do, and that floor was already had a few apartments looted when I was doing things more haphazardly. Day 285, and I wanted a bit of the old adrenaline, so I busted out the shotgun and headed to the west side of March Ridge to start clearing out over there. In addition to the shotgun, I also decided to switch my sidearm up a bit for a stronger gun. I switched from the M36 pistol to the M625 revolver, which used 45 instead of 38 special of the M36. During the shotgun rampage, Max hit the next level of reloading. I had a bit of time after the shooting was finished to dismantle my way through a couple of houses before heading home. I started dismantling and looting my way through the first floor of the building on day 286. This was a bit slower than the second floor had been, because I started taking the planks I made from dismantling the beds and the wardrobes to barricade the windows in each apartment. We were kind of past the point where I needed to defend this building, but it still felt like the right thing to do. On day 287, in order to clear up more of the west side of town, I took the shotgun and a Molotov and had a nice walk around the neighborhood with a big crop of burning zombies. While I wasn't really sure as of yet, I imagine I lost a number of houses doing things this way. The shotgun didn't keep them as tightly packed as I wanted them to be, so some of the burning zombies probably wandered off into the various houses. The next day was back to dismantling and barricading the first floor. That work continued for the next couple of days. And on day 290 I finally finished. You may be asking yourself why this has taken so long. A big part of the problem is that all thumbs makes taking things out of cabinets or picking things up into my inventory take 400% longer. Since I have to empty out the wardrobes before I can dismantle them, and then pick up the planks to barricade, it adds up. I headed back to the western neighborhoods to keep up my dismantling job. I took a swing through the school that I'd previously looted. The tables in the cafeteria weren't super high value in terms of XP, but they were tightly packed, so it was quick and easy. Afterwards, I went back into the houses near one of the shotgun rampages to do some dismantling. I was almost killed while going upstairs in one of the houses. I was surprised to find a bunch of zombies in this house on the second floor. They were so numerous that they ended up spilling out onto the street, where I finished them with a pistol. I have no idea how they managed to just hang around upstairs in this house while I was right outside blasting away with my shotgun. Day 292 was a pretty straightforward day of dismantling a few houses on the near west side of March Ridge. The following day I headed into the neighborhoods intending to work on a few more houses, but discovered that, as I had thought, stuff was still on fire. So instead I used the fire to do a burn and hopefully clear out a big chunk of the zombies remaining in these few blocks of town. While dismantling my way through houses on day 294, I found a weird bear pelt hat. It's added by the authentic Z mod, but it is something I've never come across before. I dismantled stuff for the rest of the day and slept in one of the bedrooms rather than make my way back to the apartment. More dismantling the next day, and at the end of the day when I had returned to the apartment, I sadly had to remove the bear hat, as it was extremely warm and making Max overheat. While in the western neighborhood on day 296, I ended up with way too many zombies on my tail, so I had to break out the pistol and get to blasting. After the zombies were dealt with, it was back to dismantling. It was while dismantling that I realized something about how long it takes to deal with the furniture. The higher value things like beds and wardrobes seem to take less time than the lower value things like tables and chairs. The higher value things like beds and wardrobes take about 12 real-world seconds to dismantle, while the lower value things like chairs and tables took more like 17 real seconds. So in addition to giving less XP, they also wasted more of my one human lifespan. Discovering this made me feel more vindicated in not wasting time on the lower value stuff. On day 297, the helicopter showed up in the late afternoon while I was dismantling. I hung around the area for a bit to see if more zombies would show up, but none did, so I just went home and went to bed. On day 298, I decided to get back into trapping. So I loaded up a bunch of mouse traps and peanut butter and went out to the field behind the apartment to set them. Afterwards, I focused hard on getting the next level electrical as I was getting close. I started doing things like removing the radios from the various cars littering the area and dismantling them. I also went back through the grocery store and found some ovens I had missed. Despite my best efforts, I still managed to come up short, but only barely. The next day I went and checked the mouse traps, finding several mice and one rat. I skinned them and was looking forward to grilled rodent later in the day. Afterwards, I stumbled on a group of zombies that had to be killed. I think they wandered in from the helicopter a few days ago. While dismantling a watch one of them was wearing, I've managed to hit level 3 electrical. And I want to get your feedback on something. I'm seriously considering teaching Max the generator book now that he's hit level 3 electrical. I know I had previously said I would wait to do it at level 5, but that just seems impossible. I think I've proven at this point that I can live without the generator. I would just really like to be able to turn some lights on in the base. Let me know what you think. After that, I was back into the neighborhoods to dismantle. The next day, it was raining hard, and while working my way through the various houses, I came across one with a large number of zombies still hanging out inside. I fought through the rain to finish them off, and in the afternoon headed home for a lazy day 300. On day 301, it was back out into the southwestern neighborhoods to continue on my goal of reaching level 7 carpentry. I killed a few zombies and dismantled a fair amount of beds and cabinets. I heard on the radio that a tropical storm was coming. By the end of the day, as I was traveling back to base, it was definitely beginning to set in, making driving difficult. Back at base, I spent a bit of the later afternoon practicing tailoring. The storm continued into day 302, and I spent the bulk of the day exercising and working on my tailoring. In the afternoon, as the rain was beginning to let up, I went out to the field and planted some fresh crops. Can't let that free water go to waste. After feedback from everyone on teaching Max how to use the generator after successfully grinding to electrical level 3, I took a yes for an answer and did it. Now that he could use a generator, I had to go and fetch one. Thankfully, I remembered seeing one in a shed by the burned out church. How did the church get burned out? Who's to say, really? So on day 303, I jumped in the car and headed over towards the church. I was surprised to find a sizable zombie population in the area, as I thought I had cleared it. They must have wandered in from the woods due to a helicopter or something. So I broke out my revolver and started blasting. I ran out of bullets for my guns, with about a quarter of the horde left, so I had to resort to smashing them the old-fashioned way. After finishing with the horde, I quickly moved over to the shed and retrieved the generator. I then went by the gas station, stopping to kill another small group of zombies, to collect the gas I needed to get this thing started. I temporarily placed the generator out on the deck where all my water barrels are. I didn't fire it up right away, as I didn't really have a need for power at the moment. Afterwards, it was a water barrel bath, then bed. In the morning, I grabbed some peanut butter and made a quick trip past the mouse traps to bait them up. Afterwards, I took a trip down to the video store. I had been in here before to steal some posters for the base, but I didn't really loot it properly because at the time I had no way of watching TV. I took my time going back through the shelves looking for any type of tape that could provide a skill boost. When that was finished, I headed out towards the entrance to March Ridge. I was taking it personally that the previously cleared areas were starting to get re-infested with zombies, so I spent most of the afternoon clearing a group that had set up shop by the entrance. When I returned to base and fired up the generator for the first time, I noticed that the power consumption menu, that 11 small refrigerators were pulling power. If I were to leave it like this, I would burn through gas at a quick pace. So I turned off the generator and started moving apartment to apartment, dismantling the fridges that I didn't need. This project continued into day 305. I was fairly confident of the radius the generator was powering, but it covered multiple floors of the apartment building, so I had to go apartment to apartment and floor to floor to get them all. I got a fright at one point coming down the stairs as a zombie had wandered into the stairwell. Jump scare aside, I was able to quickly deal with her. Once I had managed to get all the fridges, I powered the generator back up. Seeing only one fridge on the list, I knew I got them all. In the afternoon, I checked my mouse traps, getting a couple of small rodents. In the evening, I did some exercise and went to bed. On the morning of day 306, I spent some time in front of the TV. I broke out my tapes and started watching to see what kind of XP I could get out of them. I started with Car Zone Episode 1 and followed it up with Episode 2. Between them, it barely moved the needle. Slow learner is a beast. Next was a bit of woodcraft. Making it to level 7 carpentry was one of the major goals at the moment. I had the tapes for Episodes 1, 3, and 6. It helped some, knocking a few hundred XP points off of what I needed to earn, but definitely not as much as I had hoped for. At that point, I decided to take a break from the TV and go back to work dismantling my way through March Ridge. The first house I attempted to enter, however, had other plans as zombies came pouring out. It took a fair amount of effort to bonk my way through the zombie menace and get in to do my dismantling. The rest of the houses I worked through the afternoon were much more sedate. Day 307 was more zombie fighting and more dismantling. The day was rainy, which always makes things a little bit more difficult, but there were no more houses full of surprise hordes. Just the occasional pissed off homeowner that needed a dealing with. Back at base in the evening, I watched a few more tapes, including Dead Wrong, which gives a bit of reloading and aiming XP, Mother's Boy, which gives one hit of Small Blade, Z Squad Season 2 Episode 3, which gives a hit of mechanics and metalworking. I also had Exposure Survival Episode 5, which gives a bit of carpentry XP. While I hadn't made it to the carpentry level I needed to really start my base construction project, I decided that on day 308 would be a good day to at least get started. So I grabbed the sledgehammer and headed to the apartment next door to the one we've been using. I then spent the better part of the day demolishing every interior wall in the entire apartment, leaving it one big open space. Before bed, I got in a bit of exercise. In the morning of day 309, a number of cabbages were ready for harvest, so I plucked them and took them upstairs, absolutely jam-packing our small apartment fridge. I would need to think about finding a bigger one. After that, it was back out into the neighborhoods to dismantle furniture. I was getting pretty close to level 7. Day 310, more dismantling. I did spend a bit of time in the morning shooting zombies to try to get the area as close to clear as I could before making my entrance into the houses. I would much rather fight them outside than in the cramped houses. After that, it was a day full of constructive destruction. The next day, more of the same. My plans for most of the rest of the year are dependent on having the next level of carpentry, so I really buckled down to try and get there. I got to within 200 points of my goal by the end of the day. Rather than travel all the way back to base, I bedded down in a townhouse for the evening. I spent the morning of day 312 continuing to dismantle. I had to deal with the occasional zombie, but they weren't too terrible in this part of town. As I was nearing my goal of the next level of carpentry, I decided to return to base and finish it off dismantling some of the things that I had skipped in my previous tear through the building. I finally reached my goal in the mid-afternoon. I celebrated by making a strawberry salad. After dinner, I spent a bit of time watching the various cooking VHS tapes I had collected. They were enough to push me over the edge into level 3 cooking. Now that I had the carpentry level I needed, it was time to start the first stages of my big base construction project. The first step was building a staircase to the roof. I took Max over to the next apartment and knocked a hole in the wall. I then built a small platform. From there, I had to run around the building collecting some more loose boards I had left behind from my dismantling. Once I had enough, it was back to the hole in the wall to build a staircase to the roof. Once on the roof, I started sealing over the gap between our current apartment and the one I had demolished the walls in. I ran out of boards before I could finish this project, but I did go and fetch the generator afterwards and move it to the roof. Just after midnight on day 314, Max was awoken by the sound of zombies banging on doors. I grabbed a glow stick and headed down to the ground level to try and figure out where the zombies were making the noise. I found them banging on barricades directly below our apartment. I dispatched them fairly easily, but accidentally cut Max's hand by climbing through the window that still had broken glass in it. After sleeping the rest of the night, I collected more loose planks from around the base and finished the floor, or possibly roof depending on how you look at it. I then shifted down to the level of our apartment and put in a floor and a couple of walls to attempt to fully enclose the area. I was disappointed to see that Zomboid didn't want to consider this area as being inside. This is something that the game struggles with when it comes to player-built structures. At this point, I was hopeful I could figure it out. In the morning of day 315, I collected some carpet from one of the other apartments and started laying it on what I hoped would be an indoor extension to our apartment. I then headed into the business district part of March Ridge, originally going that way to look for stuff for my apartment, but I quickly was overrun with a large group of zombies. I started out just shooting them with my revolver, but as the group continued to grow, I had to switch to a Molotov. I spent most of the rest of the day burning out the zombies. I continue to be annoyed by these zombies showing up back in places I've already cleared. If I'd wanted to deal with that, I wouldn't have turned respawn off. On day 316, I started by building a water barrel on the roof by my nearly completed floor. After that, I spent a bunch of the day cleaning up all the random junk that was strewn about the floor in the expansion apartment. At the end of the day, I made it through another couple of our cooking tapes. In the fog the next morning, I harvested another small crop of strawberries. Afterwards, I jumped in the big truck and drove a short distance to the big restaurant to the south. The first thing I needed from here was a big fridge to take back to the base. Then I collected bits of wood flooring until I had filled up the truck. I didn't have a use for this yet, but I would in the near future. Back at base, I collected more carpet and added it to the new floor between the two apartments. The name of the game on 318 was cleaning. I spent the morning cleaning up the weird dark lines left on the floor after the wall removals. I also made sure to clean all the wall tiles to make them as shiny and new as I could, because I wouldn't be able to access them much longer. The next phase of the base building started by sledgehammering out the flooring between the 3rd and the 4th floor. I can now reveal that my plan is to make a home that in part has double height ceilings. Very classy. I wasn't able to get through all of what I wanted on this day, but it was a good step in the right direction. In the evening, I watched the remaining cooking VHS tapes. They made very little overall difference in Max's cooking level. The next day was more destruction. I worked my way through the flooring I wanted to destroy on the 4th floor. I had left a little bit to be a balcony of sorts. I then moved down to the 3rd floor and started taking out most of the walls on this level. When Max was thoroughly winded, I took a break from the smashing to build a staircase between levels 3 and 4. Before going to bed, I attempted to troubleshoot the inside-outside problem I was having with the bit that was supposed to link our apartments. I tried adding and removing pillars to no avail. I also went so far as to knock down all the walls between the new apartment bit and the problem area. This did not fix the problem. The game still thinks that one section is outside. On the morning of day 320, I decided I needed a second generator to permanently place at the gas station. So I ventured out into the city proper to try and locate one in a shed. While trying to locate a likely shed, I ran into a bunch of zombies and had to spend a good amount of time bashing my way through the horde. After clearing out the horde, I managed to locate a second generator in a nearby shed. I took that to the gas station and hooked it up, and then I filled all the available containers I'd brought with me. Back at base, I ventured up to the roof to top up the generator there. It was at this point that I really decided to dig into fixing the room, not room situation. I copied the save and took it into dev mode to mess with it with the dev tools, to try and figure out if I could fix it there. You can see here, using the ISO region's debug menu, that the game knows that it's part of the large interior room, but for some reason won't consider it indoors. I also went over to Reddit and asked for help on the Project Zomboid subreddit, but in the end I wasn't able to fix it. Left with no options, started framing out a new wall to replace the one I'd knocked down previously. I spent the next day dismantling some stuff around the apartment to get the planks I needed to finish rebuilding the wall I had started the previous day. After that, I knocked out the window to our original apartment and built a door there, so at least I could walk between them like a civilized person instead of climbing in and out the window. I did a quick patrol around the southwestern side of the city on the morning of day 322. I was curious as to if there were still any large hordes of zombies wandering around, but I didn't see any, just small numbers of zombies here and there. It really is amazing how much clearing Max has been able to achieve, considering how infested March Ridge is by default. Back at base in the afternoon, I spent most of the rest of the day pulling up the flooring in the lower part of the apartment and replacing it with the wood floor I had taken from the restaurant. While getting ready to go to bed, I could hear a zombie banging on the barricades downstairs, so Max went down and dealt with the noisy visitor. I had been working on the apartment for a few days in a row, so I decided it was time to blow off a little steam on day 323. So I loaded up the shotgun and headed out to where I had seen the most zombies in the previous patrol. The loud booming encouraged the ones hiding in houses to come out and play. The hiders turned out to be more than I thought they would be. This mistake seems to be a recurring issue for me, so it took longer to deal with the group than I thought it would. But it wasn't too much of a problem. At the end of the day, I checked on the farm and harvested what would probably be the last crop of the year, some carrots. Day 324, I took the big truck down to the restaurant again to pull up more flooring. It was a bit of a tedious process, and more of it broke than I would have liked, but I loaded up the truck. I then unloaded the truck and put the flooring down in the lower part of the apartment. It was much nicer than the grimy carpet that was there before. Day 325 was more flooring replacement. When I ran out of bits of flooring from the truck, I also spent some time mopping up the dirt and grime from the floors and walls of the lower apartment. In the afternoon, I had to go back and get more flooring bits to continue the work. On day 326, I finally installed the fridge I had put in the truck like a week ago. You don't want to rush into these things. I then put down all the flooring I had on me and cleaned the grime some more. I finished the day off by removing more of the walls from the lower apartment, as I wanted to have an open floor plan here. The next morning, I had finally plumbed the sink to connect to the water barrel I had placed on the roof. I had been holding off because I wanted the new kitchen to extend into the part of the apartment that I can't get to be considered inside. At this point, I'd officially given up on that plan, so time to make do with reality. And so I put a cabinet and a sink in there. In the afternoon, it was more flooring acquisition and then placement. More apartment work on the next day. Further laying of floors, and I once again broke out the sledgehammer to take down some more of the walls. I was trying to space out this sledgehammer work because it wore max out, and if I didn't have the floors to put down in that space, there was no reason to remove them yet anyways. The helicopter arrived overhead in the afternoon, but I was staying inside anyway, so I mostly just ignored it. In the evening, I had built a second set of stairs, because having two sets of stairs makes the place fancier. It is known. I hadn't realized it yet, but I actually didn't line them up properly, so in the future they will have to be replaced. In a project that was completely pointless except in the big number good department, I was close to reaching the next level of metalworking, but I had no propane. So on the morning of day 329, I went out into the city to find a propane grill so I could take the tank from it. I found one, but had to do a bit of fighting for it. Upon making it back to the apartment building, I found a largish group had showed up, probably the result of the helicopter. I started to work on them with my pistol, but eventually ran out of ammo. I really should start carrying more of it. For no good reason except a change of pace, I also broke out the hunting knife to stab my way through the remaining 10 or so zombies. Now that I had propane, I refilled the torches and dismantled the remaining bathroom fixtures in the lower apartment. I could have just smashed them with a sledgehammer, but then I would be passing up on the crumbs of metalworking XP. I still managed to come up just short of hitting the next level though. I had almost, but not quite all the flooring I need, so it was back to pull up some more. I collected more and then placed it back at base. It was while working here that I realized that the two staircases weren't aligned properly, so I had to go and find 15 more planks so I could tear down the old staircase and rebuild it in the proper place. I had a number of zombies to deal with on the first floor on day 331. I had thought that defending the building wasn't really going to be necessary at this point, but I clearly should rethink it, because every few days, there are at least a couple of zombies close by. I traveled over to the city bar to try and take the bar elements for the new apartment, but despite having a 70% success rate, I managed to break both of them. No liquor shelves for Max today. I killed a few zombies lurking out close to our building before heading back inside and cleaning up some of the junk I've been leaving on the floors. The next morning, I continued to clean up more junk, and once I got bored with that project, I headed out to find more bleach so I could finish cleaning the floors and walls of this room. Near the grocery store, I had to deal with a small horde, but it wasn't too much trouble for Max these days. After finding more bleach, it was back to base to finally make the place spick and span. On day 333, I needed more gas for the generator, so I made a trip over to the gas station. This trip turned into a general sweeping of the area for the few zombies that were around. After getting the gas I needed, I went back up to the bar to collect the pool table. I then waddled my way back home to install it. It didn't line up very well with the carpet I had already placed, so I moved the carpet elsewhere. In an effort to stop the small number of random zombies turning up on day 334, I loaded up the shotgun, and again, went to work. I cleared a group close to the business district of March Ridge, and then I moved further down into the southwestern neighborhoods and took out another group. One of the houses near this second group was a survivor home, so once I was done with the zombies, I headed inside to check it out. I didn't really need anything at this point, but the loot is always fun to see. I found another katana that I'll never use. After that, it was back home for a little bit of rodent meat, and I placed some shelves and a table in the new part of the apartment. Day 335 was the beginning of furniture shopping. So of course, I loaded up my shotgun and hit the road in the big truck, a totally normal way to go furniture shopping. I drove down to the southwestern neighborhoods and started blasting to get the local zombies together for a bit of re-death. Once I had finished taking them out, I collected a few pieces of furniture in various houses to bring home. I also collected a number of flamingos to add to my growing flock. In the evening, back at base, I started the beginning of my TV watching space. The next day was a bit of decorating. I placed my new flamingos on the roof with the rest of the flock to give them a nice place to hang out. I also collected a bunch of my gun-related items and laid them out on the table in a bit of an armory look. I hadn't been very diligent about filling the generator, so in the late evening it died, and I made the poor decision to go up on the roof to refill it. I had assumed I had a glow stick in my backpack, as I usually do, but I didn't check for it. When I made it up onto the roof, I was able to get over to the generator and refill it, but it turned out I didn't have a glow stick. The lack of glow stick or flashlight combined with the pitch black nights of the scenario meant that I couldn't find my way to the stairs, and Max had to have a cold night's sleep on the roof. Since Max was exhausted from his very much not restful sleep on the roof, day 337 was a pretty light duty. It mostly involved wandering around the apartment building, moving furniture and light fixtures up into the base. I got a pool cue holder from the rec room, the giant flag from the 4th floor, an arcade machine and pinball machine from the 2nd floor. I also reoriented the TV space as I didn't like where I'd put it previously. Day 338 was more furniture shopping. The houses were pretty empty at this point, but I did have to clear the occasional zombie. I got a bench for the indoor-outdoor section of the base and collected a few copies of the same rug as I wanted to make a long one in the middle of the downstairs. I also haven't talked about it much, but for a while I've been having Max work out in the middle of the night when the restless sleeper trait wakes him up. It seems to be a decent use of time. Not sure if he'll make it to the next level before the end, but I'm trying. Day 339 was even more furniture shopping. I got pieces of the rug to make the long rug even longer. I also collected some lawn furniture to put on the roof. At the end of the day, I used some of the spare planks I had to start installing a railing on the 2nd floor landing, so it'd be less of a fall risk. On day 340, I decided it was time to fix a historical wrong that had been done to us. There was a tragedy that occurred very early in the days of the playthrough that I needed to set right. To that end, I loaded up the truck and took to driving. Sunday driver, of course, caused this to be a very slow trip across the map, but in the late afternoon, I managed to make it back to our original base, way out in the countryside. I wish I could say it was nice seeing it again, but it was decidedly not a pleasant place to be. I did find it interesting to see all the trash I left behind when I moved. The next morning, it was go time. Max made his way through heavily infested territory to make it back to the farm north of Muldraugh. Once out of the trees and in the field, it was Molotov time, and I spent a good chunk of the day burning the zombies out in the area. It was nice to get a bit of vengeance on these zombies that had tormented me so badly in the early days of the playthrough. Vengeance was not my goal here today, however. The true wrong that we were fixing is that I had left behind in this house a Spiffo mascot head. Once things were clear enough from the burning zombies, I headed inside to clean the head. I also took a fancy gown for good measure. I was going to loot the house a bit more, but when I left the closet, a burning zombie was dying on the floor, so instead I made my escape. I dodged around zombies as best I could as I made my way through the woods back to the old base. I hadn't brought much in the way of food with me, so I spent the rest of the evening foraging, hoping to find some food, but came up empty. Day 342 was back into the truck to make our way back to March Ridge with our liberated Spiffo head. On the road into the town, a small horde had appeared while I was away. So to make up for the drudgery of the drive, I hopped out and used the shotgun to take care of these interlopers. I still had a bit of time when I got back to the base, so I used it to finish off the railings on the landing before bed. On day 343, I first headed over to the gas station to collect some more fuel for the generator. Then it was back into the neighborhoods for random stuff. The looting was mostly successful, and I even got to spend some time killing zombies, including a nice little series of fence kills that made me happy. Back at base in the evening, I laid out a rug and got a nice little sitting area, then added some posters to the wall. Day 344 was just more decorating. I was a bit worried when I started this apartment project that I wouldn't get the lower level to feel lived in at all, but I think it's making progress. Day 345 was the beginning of a poorly thought out trip I decided to take. In the morning, I hopped into the van and headed down the road to Riverside. I navigated my way through the zombie-covered streets, then stopped next to the local Gigamart. I left the truck, accidentally forgetting to turn it off, and started a burn. I also used the shotgun to really ring the dinner bell. I guess I thought the population was a bit lower here, because even burning my way through the whole day, there was still more and more zombies showing up. After the zombies were burned out, I was able to go into the Gigamart for a bit, but I didn't feel safe staying in the city with so many zombies around. So I went out into the countryside to sleep in a house we'd stayed in previously. Because I'd only brought a single Molotov with me, as I thought I would be able to do this trip in one day, I had to work hard to get my hands on some more burning material. I worked my way back into the city and made my way over to the bar. From there I first tried to kill enough zombies to get inside and grab a bourbon bottle. This didn't work and I got super close to getting killed, losing my helmet and getting a cut in a fall. So I changed tactics and started collecting the local zombies. I was eventually able to move them away enough for me to get into the bar and grab a bourbon bottle and make a Molotov. From there it was another day of burning out zombies. In the evening, I risked sleeping upstairs in one of the tiny rooms. I survived, and the next morning I was able to fight my way over to the primary goal of my trip, the clothing store, where I was able to steal a mannequin. Because I hadn't learned my lesson, I decided to push my luck and attempt to get some more bar pieces to bring back to the apartment. I moved the truck over to the entrance of the bar, and a group of zombies didn't take too kindly to the noise and came over to investigate. I was still carrying the mannequin at this point, so I had to quickly drop it and then burn out the rest of the zombies harassing me. After all that effort, I was only able to get one piece of the bar. The rest broke while I was trying to pick them up. I decided at that point that I had tempted fate enough and I drove home. On day 348, I installed my single piece of bar. It wasn't all I'd hoped for, but added a little something to the place. I also brought in the mannequin and put on a big dress, and of course the real reason for it, the spiffo head. Afterwards, I spent the day cleaning up a few single zombies scattered around the area, just keeping Max safe. I also went up to the roof to check on the generator and did a bit of repair work. Afterwards, for no other reason than I wanted to hear the music, I grabbed my metalworking tools and went down to the first floor to dismantle a bunch of chairs until I hit the first level. Day 349 was the beginning of my final large project. It was time to build a wall around the base. No more random zombies banging on barricades in the middle of the night. I grabbed my wood axe and went down to cut some trees. I was actually able to get a fair amount of framing done before it got too late and Max got too tired. 350 was all about the wall, more framing. By the end of the day, I'd covered most of one side in frames. I took a break from the wall the next day to go to the western side of Martridge and do some shotgun work. The zombie population was getting pretty low over here, but I found enough to have a good time. I also rescued some more flamingos and added them to the roof block. More framing on day 352. By the end of the day, I had framed out the entirety of one side of the building and started putting up some actual walls. I had caught some mice in my traps, so I had a rodent meat dinner. The next day I framed out more of the other part of the wall. I got slowed down on this part of the project because my wood axe was wearing out and I had to source a replacement. Good but not great progress by the end of the day. Day 354, all framing all of the time. Big progress on this part of the wall. Towards the end of the day, some zombies showed up and I had to deal with them with my pistol as I was too worn out to fight them with melee weapons. Day 355, I had to take a break from wall work to fill up a few gas cans as the amount of fuel in the generator was getting low. Afterwards, I made a lot of progress on building wall sections along the eastern side of the building. Build, 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 that's the name of the game. Even got the truck involved to move large amounts of wood. Always good to take a break during a big project, so on day 356, I walked my way down towards the southeastern corner of March Ridge to fetch one of the cars I had left in that area ages ago. Along the way, I cleaned up a few errant zombies. After getting the car, I drove up to the entrance to March Ridge and killed a few more zombies up there. I also swapped from a sports car to a truck I left by the entrance ages ago on my first visit to March Ridge. 358 was back down to working on the wall, and I finished building the wall segments on the eastern side and made a big dent in the southern part of the wall. I have been leaving large gaps that will eventually be filled with double-sized doors. More wall building on 358. I haven't previously pointed out this one spot in the wall yet where this car is in my way. I'll get it removed eventually, but right now it's just awkwardly blocking my building. By the end of the day, I only had a small amount of wall left to build. Almost done with my wall on day 360. This whole project would go a lot faster if Disorganized didn't make it take 400% more time to pick up the planks I needed for construction. I also wandered up to the area on the northwestern side of the building to see if it was closed off or not. The answer is that it was not. So technically, even when the wall is finished, there will be an open space on this side, but I'm okay with that risk. My midnight exercises have put me very close to making it through level 6 strength. Hopefully Max can make it before the end. I built the gates today and almost finished walling in the extra bits on either side. In the fog on the morning of day 361, I grabbed the truck and drove it over to push out of the way the car that was blocking me from finishing my wall. I expected this to be harder due to Sunday driver, but it was actually pretty easy, and I happily finished the wall after the car was moved. Afterwards, I let Max have a little bit of a rest on the couch in his fancy apartment. I couldn't let the year finish without at least one more big blowout, so I headed up to the entrance of March Ridge and spent some time blasting away zombies. Once that was done, I headed down the road to an area I knew was full of them and started blasting some more zombies. Finally, on my way back into town, I stumbled across more zombies and more blasting. In the middle of the night during one of my workouts, Max hit level 6 strength. I suspect if I had stayed more vigilant about this throughout the playthrough, I could have gotten him to one more level in fitness and strength, but it's hard to stay motivated to work out, you know. Once the sun was actually up, I went on a drive around the city looking for lawn gnomes and flamingos I hadn't rescued. I had to spend a bit of time clearing out zombies in a few spots in order to rescue our inanimate friends. The day has finally arrived, the end of Max Loserman's one painful year. To celebrate the occasion, I thought we'd do a walk through the base before we check out the final stats. Starting out here with the new wall, we head inward, past our fleet of cars. We head upstairs past Doorman David. Past second floor David and his plants. On the third floor, we pass the 4 Davids guarding the base entry. Stepping into the base, first it's the TV and arcade cabinet area. Then shifting across the room to the pool table and pinball machine. Transitioning to the back of the room is the armory. And over here I would call it a reading nook, but Max is illiterate, so I guess it's just an extra sitting area. Up one of the 2 grand staircases is a small bar and a huge American flag. Out onto the porch area that I'd never been able to enclose. From there we enter the kitchen. After the kitchen, it's the main storage areas. Ignore all the bags on the floor, I'm very well organized. Through this door is a secondary sitting room, and the other porch with my bathwater barrels. Finally, it's Max's cozy bedroom. Up on the roof, we can see my flock of flamingos, as well as Flamingo David lurking on the edge. He never got the flock to fully accept him. This is the home of the generator and a casual sitting area. The tent is in case I get stuck up here in the middle of the night again. And that's the base. It's not the fanciest thing ever, but it feels like a nice place to ride out the apocalypse to me. In terms of stats, In the end, Max killed 23,307 zombies. The vast bulk of that was fire kills at 18,449. Following that, firearms made up 2,153, and then long blunt and spears basically tied at 1,219 and 1,162 respectively. The stat I find most interesting in the kills is a single axe kill. I wonder when that happened exactly. And here's the final skill screen. I'm not going to go through them all, but one of the things I did find interesting is how few skills made it past level 3. I guess it was at that point that the skill slowdown from things like Slow Learner and Pacifist really started to bite into the progression. With a full year behind him and a soft rain starting to fall outside, Max retreats to his bed to take it easy for a while. He has seen enough safe areas become infested with zombies again to ever really feel safe from the undead horde. But right now, he can take a moment and feel solace that for now, he is safe and warm. It's a time to reflect on how far he's come from a man with no skills and severe impairments to a true hero of the wasteland. Good luck out there, Max.